Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was a hero out of place part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story bajy from fanfiction. So let's start the video. I'm late. I'm super late. She cried out in urgent stress as she bolted out the door, book bag and all, along with a few items that shouldn't be on her person right now. As she bolted out the door, hastily scarfing down the biggest pink lady apple she managed to find in the fridge to serve as her improv breakfast. Running as fast as her legs could carry her, berating herself for oversleeping on one of the most important days of her life, going straight down the street, running as if her rear end was on fire, determined not to be later than she already was. Even though technically she would only be cutting it close by at least 1 minute if she doesn't get stopped by a few very annoying red lights. Today is the entrance exam, and there's no way I'm going to miss it. This may be my one chance to be able to experience what it's like to attend a Japanese-themed school here in the US. And if I can score a scholarship, then I'll be able to attend one of the best universities out there. She thought to herself. That is if I make it in time. And if I pass. Part of her wanted to really kick herself in the butt for staying up late last night binge-watching anime, knowing for a full fact that the exam was going to start first thing in the morning, and another part of her also felt like an idiot for not listening to her foster guardians about going to bed sooner, cause then she would be avoiding the distressful stress that she was currently facing now. Some days she hated when she was too stubborn for her own good, though for others she was grateful for it. But right now it was a burden. This entrance exam is supposed to be really tough, and I've been studying for months just so I can attend. And just like any traditional Japanese school, exams begin in February, and if you pass them, the first day of school starts in April. She reminds herself as she did a mental checklist, making sure she had everything. And quickly realizing that she inadvertently grabbed her big black canvas messenger bag that had all of her belongings in it, as she was scheduled to move to a new foster home that was closer to her school within a few short days, roughly around the time she would get her results. So she had packed her bag well ahead of time, a week in advance, so she won't worry. Way to go, idiot. Now everybody's going to be wondering why you're carrying 2 bags like you were going on a camping trip or something. She mentally berated herself as she knew she was too far to return her bag back to the foster home. Even if she could, there be no way the school will allow her to enter the exam, as they were pretty strict for this particular one. Which seems unfair, but then again, this is the first Japanese school to ever open in my hometown and as far as I know anywhere in the US, so it makes sense that they would have very strict rules. Of course they have recommendation exams, but it's only for a select few who have gained such a huge opportunity, and I am not one of those students, so I have to make it to this exam ASAP. She thought as she just narrowly avoids getting hit by a truck as she just made it to the other side of another street. No time to yell at the driver to watch where he was going, considering he was crossing a red light, as she hastily looked at her pocket watch, which she pulled out of her pants pocket. If she were in an anime, she would totally sweat drop as her heart rate got faster. I'm really cutting it close, but I should make it so long as there are no distractions. And provided that I don't trip over my feet again. Just as she said that, however, her foot got caught on a piece of pavement, but just as she started stumbling forward, she managed to catch herself and continued with her stride. Phew, that was close. She thought as she sighed in relief. Poca, old girl, today is not a day to let your clumsiness get in the way of your goal. The girl Poca was not only known for being kind and smart, but was at the same time known for being kind of clumsy, yet even if she stumbles, she fights tooth and nail to ensure she doesn't break or drop anything, or stumble when she doesn't want to, just narrowly avoiding a mess altogether. 87% of the time she succeeds, but the other 13% she does not do well. And she was not somebody who believed in luck, as it was nothing but superstition. And she knew not everything was a coincidence, as things tend to happen for a reason, whether it made sense straight away or seemed silly until it's later examined. As her current foster dad often said, whatever happens, happens, and all we can do when it does is adapt. Even though she hasn't known him and his wife for long, she knew that they were very wise. In fact, they were the most proverb-wise couple she's ever met, as she often took their words to heart, as more often than not it came in handy in some of her most frustrating and bad of circumstances. As she turned a corner, she could see the school in question right up ahead. Yes, Sakura Starlight's Border Academy. Mentally, she cheered as she quickly checked her pocket watch again, seeing that yes, she was going to make it, just under roughly 1 minute, but she will make it. Look out, school, 𝗵𝗃𝗲 𝗧𝗪𝗧 is on her way. With the excitement of reaching the school, she gained a boost of energy in her stride as she ran at top speed, relieved that she was going to make it yet determined to not be even one more second late. Yes, nothing was going to stop her nor dampen her mood. But then, without warning, as the sun peeked through the clouds above her, the light from the sun briefly blinded her, which prevented her from, at that moment, seeing her turquoise crystal pendant start to glow, which made the light even more unbearable, and before she knew it, she suddenly felt herself drop, as this caused her to be startled so bad that she couldn't scream as she forced her eyes to open, only to see that she was falling through some kind of black void. The very last thing she did before everything went black was quickly looking up, only to see the hole above her start to close as the last bit of daylight vanished, with her thinking, what on earth? Poca didn't know how long she had been unconscious. She didn't even know where she was, and as impossible as it sounds, as she was slowly starting to regain consciousness, she noticed that she felt like she was floating, almost like she was in an ocean, only she was able to breathe and there was no water. Blinking her eyes a few times to chase away the blurriness, she was eventually able to open her eyes fully, only to realize that she was in some kind of empty white space. Wait, what? Was what her mind exclaimed in shock. Where am I? She exclaimed as she looked around, only to go stumbling in the air as she kept getting twisted and turned as if she were in outer space due to there seemingly being no gravity at all. She yelped and grunted, trying to get herself back upright as she felt like she was fighting against solid air, which in her case she kinda was. Eventually she was able to get herself back upright, at least she thought she did, for it was so hard to tell when there was literally nothing else around her as everything was white as snow. Thankfully she could see herself, 'cause otherwise she would have thought that she'd gone blind. Okay, so, let's think. She spoke aloud as she started to evaluate. First of all, I was on my way to take the entrance exam when suddenly I fell through a hole that seemed to have come out of nowhere after getting blinded by the sun for a brief moment. Secondly, smack. Ouch. She yelled as she rubbed her throbbing left cheekbone, which she slapped so hard that she was pretty sure it would leave a bruise later. This is not a dream. This is very much real. Third, she pauses briefly as she puts the pocket watch, which was still in her left hand, strangely enough, even after all that had transpired, back into her pocket before grabbing a compact out of the same one as she opened it to look at the mirror to check on herself. Her khaki brown hair still up in a high spiky ponytail, with a tuft of her bangs both upright and seemed to sway to the left side of her forehead. The smaller bits, especially her side bangs, framed the rest of her face and head as a whole. Her bright chocolate brown eyes were still staring back at her, same with her fair pale tan skin. And she was still in the same outfit as she had been wearing that morning, which consists of an overhead sky blue hooded jacket with a big pocket right around the stomach area and police strobe blue around the ends of her long sleeves and around her hoodie, with the drawstrings being white, a white t-shirt underneath which said, I love 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the last part being an anagram for the academy she was intending to attend. Not to be mistaken with any other coincidental acronyms, in black letters, and the school's logo on the upper right corner of her shirt, which was a cherry blossom tree on top of a school building within a circle, a turquoise crystal pendant in the shape of a flat spear that hung on a black chain around her neck that was the size of her palms, black shorts that reached to above her knees, black shin-length socks, blue and white tennis shoes, and her white and blue backpack and her black canvas messenger bag. Despite having fallen through that hole, I'm still okay, Poca said as she signed relief in seeing that thankfully she was still in one piece, although she couldn't help but, as she got a closer look, wondered why she suddenly looked more animated, for lack of better term. Deciding to ask about that later, she put the compact back into her pocket and went on to the fourth thing. And lastly, I have no idea why that hole suddenly appeared out of nowhere like that. Things like that don't just happen willy-nilly. There has to be a reason, as this is not a cartoon like Tom and Jerry, not to mention the fact that I have literally no idea where I am, other than the fact that I know that I'm not in Arizona anymore. There was silence for a while as she was trying to ponder why she ended up here in the first place and how she can even get back home. What have I gotten myself into? She asked her aloud, even though she wouldn't be able to answer it. She wasn't going to ask that classic question because she knows that stuff will happen immediately after. She was not somebody who would tempt anything. But apparently even thinking about it triggered something, because suddenly, just as she blinked at that moment, multiple lights started to seemingly blink into existence, and the more she blinked, the more bright, colorful orbs of light seemed to appear all around her in what seems to be every single color she could possibly think of, and those she didn't even know there were. The orbs of light were not too terribly bright, as they only gave off a gentle glow like that of a firefly, and the orbs in question were the size of those big marbles she's seen the neighbors next door play with, and upon closer inspection she realized that each the orbs seemed to have a different form of Japanese kanji on each and every single one that seemed to represent something. She could not help but be in awe of everything around her, as this seemed too dreamlike to be real, because this all around her was as beautiful as something that came out of a fantasy novel. As she looked, her eyes caught on to a particular orb that was right next to her. The orb in question was a clearish white color. The kanji was, which literally translated as translate. In her mind, it kind of made sense, as translation was to make things known, like interpreting another language so it could be understood, to make it clear as crystal, and she figured the clearest white color represented that. Unable to stop her curiosity, she reached for the orb, just as she was about to grab it. The orb itself went straight to her and into a pouch that literally manifested right before her eyes, as the pouch in question was completely see-through, yet the black outline made it clear that it was there, as the thing was about the size of a slightly bigger coin purse, and due to the obvious transparent nature of said pouch, she could see the orb within it. Blinking hard, she furiously rubbed her eyes, trying to comprehend what she just saw, eventually opening her eyes once more only to confirm that yes, the pouch and orb was still there, so what had happened literally did just happen. Okay, either I really am dreaming and I'm just simply in a coma, which caused the dream to seem extremely real, I've officially gone insane with schizophrenia, or this is really happening right now. She said aloud, trying to keep herself from bursting from shock, astonishment, fascination. She really did not know, as she couldn't decide on any one of them, so she chose overwhelmed instead, because this was just too much to handle as it was. This is more confusing than that major math test we had last month, she said before audibly shuddering. Trigonometry and fractions? Long story short, that was not a good day for her or her classmates, as their new math teacher was, to put it bluntly, very brutal. Deciding not to focus on that, she turned her attention back to the orbs, only to see, to her surprise, that now the orbs had the English translation of each of the kanjis hovering above them within the orbs. Even the ones that were far away, she can now see their English names a little more clearly within her peripheral view. Strength, hyperflash, solar star, super strength, shock absorption, typhoon, bloodstock, masquerade, autopilot, charge, lung radar, impact recoil, life force, to name a few, and these were really just within her range of sight alone amongst thousands, maybe millions of others. Although for some reason she didn't understand, she couldn't help but feel like some of the names of those orbs seemed kind of familiar. But she couldn't comprehend why. However, she didn't get to ponder long, as another orb caught her interest, which was the kanji for insects, and the color of it being that of chartreuseish green. Unlike most girls, she actually likes bugs, even those that would be rather dangerous by whatever means. Any insect fascinated her. The only ones she absolutely hated were mosquitoes, termites, bedbugs, and flies, because all four of them were the real pests. And she more often than not felt kinda sorry for any poor insect that got caught in any predator plants like Venus flytraps or pitcher plants or sundews, but that was the circle of life, and she was aware that some of the insects she found fascinating were pests in their own right too, for one reason or another. Despite still being very confused by everything, which was the understatement of her decade, she decided to go along with it and see where things will go, to truly see whether or not this was actually real, or if she was in a comatose dream, or if she really had lost her marbles, as she reached out for that particular orb. As just like the last one, it came to her before going into the small pouch too, joining its fellow orb mate. For the next however many minutes or hours maybe, she was within that void, and after some bit of trial and error and navigating, she began slowly making her way through the void, looking at all the orbs to see if any of them might catch her interests. So far she had collected a few more, such as water, which was as blue as its name implies, healing, which was a pinkish-white, detector, which was kind of like a mix between gray and red, and adaptation, which was white with a hint of beige. So far she had collected a total of 6 orbs, and judging by the bundle she had and the proportion of the pouch, she could only assume that there was only room for one more orb to fit in, and when she did collect it, she guessed something was supposed to happen. What that was she had no clue, but she guessed that if she collected them she could maybe somehow get out of there. As nonsensical as that sounded, she was going to have to take the risk. As she was traversing, she couldn't help but really notice that every once in a while she spotted some orbs that were completely gray, and not in different shades of gray, but in the same shade of gray, this shade of gray being dinosaur volcanic ash. Was there a purpose to them being that way? Did they serve a purpose too? Upon inspection, she realized that the gray orbs were barely readable as they seemed to be blurred, and when she touched them, they didn't go straight to her, but instead remained floating and could sense that they'd been abandoned, that they permanently were stopped in their tracks, whether by some outside force or by their own volition of circumstance, that they were unable to serve a purpose for some reason. They were left forgotten, and it was the same for each and every single orb she inspected. That were of that same color. Again, she got the same reaction. She couldn't help but feel sorry for these poor orbs. Even though that sounded kind of silly, she couldn't help but feel bad as among the beautiful array of colorful lights, these gray ones stood out and were unable to shine, were just left drifting like asteroids in the cold depths of outer space. Upon the latest one she was inspecting, she literally felt like this one was being severely repressed, that it was unable to fulfill its purpose due to something that it had no control over in terms of situation. It felt cold and alone, that it was hurt, even somehow felt sad and miserable, yet it didn't want to feel that hopeless and was struggling, refusing to stop even as it gets hurt, had been struggling to not give in, so much so that she can't help but tear up as she held the orb close to her, trying to comfort it somehow, even though it seemed crazy. She just felt like it was the right thing to do. "It's okay, everything's going to be okay," she whispered to it, trying to warm it up by rubbing it gently, pressing her body heat into it. Suddenly the orb flashed for a second, but it did so too fast for her to be able to tell what color it was underneath that volcanic gray, but she took it as a sign, even if it seemed vague, as she then proceeded to breathe as much hot air onto it as possible, trying to warm it up, trying to alleviate it of the cold surrounding it. This time she was able to see it flash. Again, even if it was for a brief moment, she nonetheless was able to tell what color it was, which was yellow, although she couldn't tell what shade it was yet. Again, she took it as a sign that what she was doing was making progress, but still wasn't enough to free it completely from its gray ensnarement. Surely there could be more she could do to free it, right? Not sure what else to do, she pulled the orb close to her as she pressed it right against her heart, gently rubbing it as if it were a child, only if said child was about as small as a mouse. She knew the analogy sounded weird, and she knew that the orb wasn't alive. She can nonetheless tell that it was kinda sentient in a sense. Come to think of it, looking back briefly and at the see-through pouch with all the other orbs inside, she couldn't help but notice that they all felt the same way, but she couldn't tell why or even how that was, even though it should be impossible. Though she could somehow tell that they were only remnants that were taken from those they used to belong to. Still, the thought of that alone felt sad. How were they all taken? Who stole them? Were they all alone, or are they able to communicate with each other somehow? She couldn't help but ponder on that as she gently brought the pouch closer to her where her heart was, as well as she held both the pouch of orbs and the lone orb close to her, trying to convey some form of comfort. Looking down, she again saw that the orb flashed once more, and this time the other orbs in the pouch glowed brighter with it. But again it returned to its gray coloring as the other orbs stopped glowing, but thankfully their color did not change. "Is there anything more I can do?" she thought to herself as she pondered. So far it flashed several times. There was a chance, but still there had to be more she could do, and not just for this little one either, but for the other orbs too. Were they just as isolated and alone as this one? She couldn't just give up. There had to be more that could be done. There just had to give them hope that everything would turn out all right, even if she didn't know how. She didn't want to believe that all was hopeless. As one of her guardians had told her in the past, hope is like a light that will always pierce through the darkness no matter how times may become, while hopelessness is a blanket of darkness that will ensnare anyone unfortunate enough to get caught in it with hardly any way to escape. This she especially took to heart, as that hope has been like a guiding light that has helped her out even in the most frustrating of times she has faced. Even when she felt lost or upset, even scared, she never forgot her guardian's words. Essentially, they were the ones to teach her what hope was when she felt very lost, especially with how many times she's been sent to a different foster home for one reason or another. They gave her hope, so she wanted to give that hope to others too, whether they ask for it or not. In fact, for an odd reason, she couldn't help but think of this one song that she heard not too long ago. While there were different versions of the song on YouTube, one of them in particular inspired her to sing a variation of her own, mainly in terms of the particular type of style of music that was done for that version. If she could somehow thank the other people on YouTube, and especially username 𝗵𝗃 for the inspiration, she would do so in a heartbeat. Whether it would help or not, she somehow felt this song was right for this particular situation. Though we roam in a place so unknown, so far from home, from a land we had known. Please do not despair nor be so sad. I am with you. Through our bond we are glad. I was given a spark of hope, a guiding light to a brighter day. I'll share this gem to help you cope, and chase all your troubles away. Though there is much that I still do not know, like why blue skies, or why the stars glow. I'll show you in my way that I care, that I'll love you. My heart is yours to share. Just then, it seemed like that song was just the spark it needed. As a moment after the song ended, did the volcanic gray orb suddenly lit up like fireworks as she yelped and had to shield her eyes, just so she wouldn't go blind. After what felt like ages, though really it was a few seconds, the bright light finally ceased, which allowed her to look back at the orb only to now see to her relief that it was no longer that awful gray it was shrouded in, but instead it was a beautiful sunflower water lily yellow that showed the kanji for hope, and it seemed to glimmer like a diamond. And not just it, but the other orbs themselves were starting to give off that same diamond-like texture as well. It was then that the bright yellow orb was finally able to join with the other orbs in the pouch. Suddenly after that, it seemed like a bubble had formed around the whole thing before the pouch itself surrounded the 7 orbs in a bright, but thankfully not blinding this time, white light that made all the other orbs seem to merge together. The size of the orbs shrank as eventually she wasn't able to see what was going on until only moments later when the white light ceased, revealing something even more perplexing as the bubble popped. Right before her, she didn't know how, but somehow it seems that the pouch had transformed into an orb, the shape of a big marble but bigger than the other orbs were, the size of a tennis ball, and the other 7 orbs are now shrunken, smaller yet still giving off their respective colorful glow and seem to be floating around aimlessly within the singular one. Probably might not be the best time to make this comparison, but for some reason this kind of reminded her of One for All, the quirk inherited by both All Might and Izuku Midoriya from one of her favorite anime, My Hero Academia. Because including itself, the quirk was composed of 7, not 8, because the stockpiling merged with the original quirk itself, becoming 1 quirks altogether. Little would she know until later that the analogy would be most accurate she ever made in her life, as about a minute after looking at the orb did it start to approach her. Until the very moment it made contact with her chest did the orb seem to phase through, going inside of her. As the instant that it made it all the way in did she herself light up like a supernova. Not blinded, but otherwise greatly startled and very confused, she screeched, "What's going on now?" Before she knew it, Poca felt herself being flung forward like she were a softball being thrown in a fast rate, quickly becoming disoriented as she felt herself flailing and cartwheeling in space, screaming as she was unable to tell what else was going on around her until, once more without warning, she tumbled out of that tunneling white space as it immediately shut behind her, unable to stop herself from spiral flying out before she felt someone catch her, the soft yet solid force of the impact making her yelp anew. Now finding herself squinting her eyes shut as she held her aching head, trying to soothe the dizziness as she heard someone, the person who caught her most likely, asked if she was all right. She could only give the 𝗧𝗏 gesture as she didn't trust her voice and didn't want to risk accidentally hurling. The guy, she believes he's male, as despite being disoriented she was able to distinctly tell it was male, seemed to understand her plight as he rubbed her back, slowing and soothingly as he guided her to breathe deeply in and out slowly to get rid of the dizziness and disorientation. She more than happily accepted, as she really hated being extremely dizzy and disoriented, especially to the point of hurling, as that was extremely unpleasant. Although funny enough, the only time she never gets that is when she's doing sports, when she has to do a few stunts here and there when playing. It was kind of weird when you think about it. Eventually, to her relief, that was exactly what she needed, as, soon enough, the dizziness and disoriented feeling went away. She sighed a sigh of relief as she looked up, ready to thank the person for not only catching her but helping her to feel better and avoid a fairly distasteful mess, already giving him a thumbs up as she was about to thank him. But she was immediately stopped dead in her tracks as she felt her jaw drop so hard it was almost like it disconnected from her head, and her eyes widened, growing to the size of dinner plates practically as her irises shrank to the size of peas. No way. Am I dreaming? I have to still be dreaming, because there is literally no way that the #1 hero is right here with me. She screeched in her head as he gave her a reassuring smile, the same iconic one he would usually give to civilians, as the #1 hero, All Might, then told her, "Glad to see you're okay. You have nothing to worry about now, my dear, because I am here." She's already been pinching herself. She is still pinching herself, ignoring the pain, but nothing was working. Unless she was really truly in a comatose dream, then this really has to be reality if she's with the #1 hero in Japan and one of her all-time favorite characters from her favorite anime, My Hero Academia. She looked around and realized that she was right in front of Dagobah Beach, in its clean and pristine state. If it weren't for the fact that she was in a severe state of shock, she would have truly been able to admire the beauty of the place, and especially at this man's successor's handiwork through the past 10 months of training before the exams. Wait? Exams. That seemed to snap her out of it and stop herself from pinching any more than she already has. She was pretty sure that she was definitely going to be bruising and hurting later on. She turned back to the man, still not believing that she really was in front of All Might, Toshinori Yagi, who had caught her and helped her to not be dizzy anymore. As he was wearing that very same dark navy blue coat and white scarf that he was wearing on the day of the entrance exam when he gave his successor. Izuku Midoriya his quirk, as she said, though kind of robotically, both still equal parts shocked and what she hopes was curiosity. Thank you for catching me, sir. Would have had a nasty fall if you hadn't caught me. I've been having a very crazy day. By the way, do you know what today is? Because I think I may have forgotten. He seemed to take it in stride, believing I was just plain nervous as all get out at meeting the #1 hero for the first time and am not sure how to start a conversation with him, which was kind of true, as he replied politely, I'm glad to hear. I can only imagine what you're going through. Not really, sir, not even close. The thought ran quickly as she continued to listen as he concluded. And as for today, why is it the day of the UA entrance exam, which will start in 2.5 hours from now? That's soon, she screamed in her head, trying her best not to do so out loud as she quickly nodded stiffly to the hero, thanking him before excusing herself that she can go to the train station to get to the exams, leaving him in the dust, outright ignoring the man trying to call her back out of concern upon seeing her face paled quite drastically. Her mind was already running a mile a minute as she was unable to hear what the hero was saying as she bolted as fast as she could. No way. No way. I'm on the day of the entrance exam. That means I'm in episode 3 of season 1. She yelled in her mind as she couldn't do so verbally as she was far too busy trying to maintain her breathing while running, trying desperately to find the train station. There were just too many things going on right now, more so than one could possibly comprehend for somebody her age. First off, somehow she had been transported to the world of her all-time favorite anime, or at least one of them. Second of all, she had just met the #1 hero in Japan and possibly the whole world, All Might, who just told her that today was the entrance exam for UA, and given the fact that she had just seen the beach completely clean and in pristine condition, that meant that Midoriya had already just left to go home and get something to eat and get changed so he can be ready for the exams. Thirdly, with her knowledge of the future, that meant that whatever happens now is in her hands. Does she leave everything to happen exactly as it did the first time around, or does she change it completely? What are some things she could change or some she couldn't for the sake of development and helping people to grow and become the heroes that they were meant to be? Too many questions and more. Although obviously there were some things she absolutely was going to change, even if she had to rip out all of her teeth to do it. And lastly, and these two were the most problematic of the whole thing, one was that she was completely quirkless, meaning that even if she did take the exams, there was a chance that she would end up in general studies rather than in heroics, although she could find a way to work around it if she had to, or if push comes to shove, she could enter for the support program given her knowledge on computer science, hacking and studying on quirks for years, so it might work. Now if only she knew when the exams for the support course was going to start. And second of all, which was the most disconcerting, she doesn't exist in this world. Due to the fact that she was from another, it made sense that there would be no profile of her ever existing in the world of her favorite anime, and if anyone found out, that would lead to severe consequences, and she would rather avoid that at all costs, meaning that she would have to play her next cards carefully to avoid being found out, or worse, especially concerning the villains. There was no way that she could just sign herself up to stay in a homeless shelter because UA would become suspicious immediately, so that meant she had to try and find some way to get some form of legitimate residency somewhere without arousing suspicion, and at the same time try to avoid as much forgery as possible, for she knew that that alone would be a nightmare to deal with. Sure, there was some things she was going to have to stretch, but as long as she could stay as close to the truth as possible and trying to make sure that nobody caught on, she should be able to manage. Hopefully she could find somewhere she could stay in the area close by to the school. She can only hope so. But that wasn't the only issue. Despite her having knowledge of the future, the very fact of trying to imagine herself facing against villains on her own was terrifying. She wasn't stupid. She knew how truly dangerous and terrifying the villains could actually be, no matter what she might have to face in the future. Not to mention the fact that she was going to need help in making things turn out better than their original outcome. Although there was an idea of how she can avoid placing a target on her back, an idea from which she heard from a few of her foster mates over the years regarding fanfiction and AO3 stories on the anime in question, so there might be a chance it'll work, but again she would have to be careful on how she played things. Sure, she wrote down everything she knew about the timeline and everything that had happened and was going to happen up until the parts where she was rather limited after Season 6 due to both being unable to get her hands on the next mangas after issue 33 and her memory being a little hazy regarding the last time she checked Wikipedia, but nonetheless were very prominent and needed to be dealt with so that those grim events never come to pass. She wrote everything down in 3 separate but otherwise very big notebooks, and all she wrote she had done so wearing rubber gloves. The reason why, around that time she wanted to do that, her hands were suffering severe dryness. She doesn't remember why at this point, too stressed to recall. And she needed to put a lot lotion on and not wanting to accidentally smear it on her work or somewhere it wasn't supposed to be, so she wore either cloth gloves or rubber gloves to make things easier and so that she could keep a grip on her pen without it slipping out of her hand every single time. She kept wearing them until a week later, when the severe dryness finally subsided. After she finished writing down what she knew from the timeline so far, kind of but not really forgetting them, as they were left in her other bag safely tucked away with all of her other belongings, completely untouched. Indeed, how funny things work out sometimes, even in ways that were not really intentional from the beginning. Thanks to those rubber gloves, she can ensure that any trace of her DNA would never be found on them, and therefore would never be traced back to her. She would have to disguise herself somehow or something so that she can deliver those notebooks to Yue. If there is anybody she could trust with this information, it was the principal of Yue himself. Now undoubtedly he would bring in all the heroes necessary for the case, including All Might, Sir Night-Eye, Gran Torino, and even All Might's trusted friend from the police force, Detective Naomi Satsukachi. Things might get tricky after, but that'll be a bridge to cross later. Now I know exactly what you are thinking. Wouldn't it be better to go to the heroes and tell them everything straight from the start? While normally that would solve things, however, there is one major problem, and it's not exactly her fault there. A while back, she couldn't remember which it was from, either fanfiction or AO3, but she remembered hearing about another story from one of her past foster mates, Thomas, about a story where a guy from their world was somehow born as Katsuki Bakugo with no clue how it happened, somehow being born with 2 quirks instead, with one being the original explosion quirk and the other being laser-like swords. And later on the story reveals that it was all for one straight from the start who had brought him into their world, and even had intel that knowledge in their world was common knowledge in the other, including information on the future, not to mention a terrifying fact that he and his doctor have been monitoring him straight from the start without him ever even knowing it, including times he'd started to change the tide of events. And then one of his former friends, Weston, in the foster care they were in at the time, decided to torment her with that part of the story to the point that she had the nightmares over it. The guy was a jerk, and long story short, he was such a horrible jerk and hated her so much for being too productively nice in his eyes that he outright tried to get her arrested for an extremely heinous crime that she had no part of. But thanks to the security cameras, for security and safety reasons that they had in their temporary home at a time, the police were able to figure out who the actual culprit was, and he was never seen again after the police took him away upon revealing that he had secretly stolen some gems from a jewelry store nearby and pawned them off to a pawn shop that was every shade of shady there was to the criminal mind. The last time she ever heard from him, it was from rumors that he ended up getting put in jail later after getting out of juvie due to problems he caused back there. And she had been seeing therapy since then. So can you blame her for being apprehensive of going straight to the heroes as yourself? She didn't know who or what brought her to this world, but she didn't want to take a chance that it was she knew who. She had to be as secretive as possible here. And even if it wasn't somehow because of him, who's to say that there might not be someone else with malicious intent watching her to see what she would do? As she turned a corner, it was then another thought struck her. While she had been learning a good handful of Japanese knowledge, including learning how to speak and read and write in Japanese, she never had time to memorize the map of Japan besides identifying some iconic places she remembered only hearing, seen pictures of on Google, or learning where towns and shows were based off of, or names of towns in the real world that came up in her favorite shows. Well, I'm a bigger idiot than I thought I was. I have no idea where I'm going. As far as I know, 𝗵𝗃 doesn't exist in our world, so I do not have a clue where I'm going or even where the train station is. And even if I did have a map from my home world, there's a huge chance that the topography will be completely different than I am familiar with. Why didn't I think of asking All Might when I had the chance instead of bolting like that? What am I going to do? Poca screamed as she felt tears welling up from her own stupidity. The saying, even the cleverest man can make a mistake, or something along those lines from the last time she saw Sherlock Holmes and the Great Escape, it's becoming rather prominent. "Do not fret, mistress, I shall help you," said a voice which made her stumble, startled, before she stopped as she looked around, panting, trying to figure out where that voice came from. It sounded male, but it sounded weird in a way she couldn't explain. "Who said that?" she called out. "I did, dear mistress," said the voice again, which made her turn left once more only to see a dragonfly. She couldn't help but blink at it as she looked around more, wondering if the bug really had said something or if there was somebody else nearby, or if she was really starting to lose her marbles. "You are not losing your marbles by any means, mistress. You did indeed hear me. It is only thanks to your quirk that I am able to speak to you," called the voice from the dragonfly, as this made her yelp a little before the dragonfly gently landed on her nose, not wanting to startle her any more than she already was. That was when it hit her. Despite being startled, she couldn't help but ask, "Quirk? What are you talking about?" "I'm quirkless," she asked and pointed out, very confused. "Actually, that is where you are wrong, mistress. From the first moment it appeared, I was able to sense it immediately, and thus I was able to know, I among many others of my kind and beyond, know you indeed have a quirk which can allow you to not only communicate with insects but control them too," he explained in a gentlemanly manner. "What? How?" she exclaimed in her head, more startled now that she witnessed this one having read her mind, before she started to retrace her steps on how this could be until it hit her like a speeding bullet. The white space I was in. All those orbs and what each one represented. Could it be? Don't tell me all of those were quirks all along, she said as more shock had struck her. But if that's true, then that means not only do I have an insect quirk, but I also have a water, detection, adapting, healing, translation, and hope quirk as well. I'm my own version of Izuku Midoriya. "It seems to be the case," said the dragonfly. "Wow, there is a lot to unravel from this, but I'm going to have to figure this out as I go. Right now, I really need to focus on finding the train station," she said as she knew that standing around wasn't going to help, especially as she was a bit on the time crunch. "I will show you the way, mistress, and do not worry about people hearing our conversation because there's one more neat aspect to this quirk, as you've noticed already. It will allow you to telepathically communicate with insects, so therefore we can keep our conversation private," the dragonfly said reassuringly. She nodded, understanding that as she put on the hoodie part of her coat, as he started to give her directions on where to go, which thankfully she had already been on the right track before they met. The two telepathically talked to the other as they eventually got to a more crowded area. The dragonfly, Ken, was a very helpful bug. Thankfully, she got there in time to get her ticket and got on the fastest train to where UA was without issue. She was especially grateful for the policy of the school she was originally going to attend that made its students have currency from Japan on their person, rather than American dollars, due to some of the small shopping areas within the school and something employed staff from Japan being rather strict about it, for a lack of better term. She was grateful to not only have gotten the currency exchange done 2 days before the exam date, but also grateful for the money that was given to her by a bystander. Long story short there, she was making her way back home from the grocery store after getting everything that was on the list. She ran into a gentleman who looked to be pretty wealthy, especially given his crisp and clean tailored suit. For an odd reason she still didn't quite understand. He wanted her to have a big wad of money because, as he put it, he was already fabulously wealthy thanks to his occupation alone. And this money, which was apparently won from a lottery that was given to him by a fellow loyal coworker who insisted that he take it as a gift, but he'd rather have the money be earned through his business rather than have it be given to him by his friend, even if that friend meant well. It was just odd for him otherwise. The gentleman insisted, especially upon realizing that she was a foster child and may need it for an emergency. He left immediately after nearly shoving it into her hands before she could ask him if he was sure about that or ask to explain further. The money in question was about $5,000. She only kept $500 for herself and gave the rest to the foster home she was in at the time. It's a good thing she wisely saved it up, because it very much came in handy here, and was further grateful that the tickets were not as expensive as she feared it would. Upon getting on, Ken had become giddy as he had always wanted to ride the train, which was pretty amusing to Poca. Then again, she can only imagine bugs being just as curious as cats. Once they were settled into a seat which was the closest to the door, Poca then started to explain to him in their minds what had happened to her before they met. Silently snacking on a honey nuts and chocolate chip bar she had in her bag, not stopping the mental conversation as the dragonfly sat calmly on her left shoulder. Which made things pretty convenient, as even if her mouth might be occupied with other things, she could still keep up the mental conversation with any bug she is interacting with. That does sound very perplexing, another world beyond our own, and one that knows the future. If it weren't for the fact that I've seen billions of quirks in this world several times over every single day of my life, I would have thought your story was more fictional than real. Ken responded after having that clustered up bomb dropped on him. He was more baffled than he was shocked, although he was very surprised in learning all of this. I was already pinching myself earlier. A part of me still thinks I'm in some kind of dream, or maybe a really deep comatose state that has led to a realistic dream, or that I've gone crazy. I'm starting to believe that it isn't, but a part of me is still fearful in acknowledging that truth. She replied, sighing from emotional exhaustion, and with how fast everything has gotten since all this started. And you also said that you ended up in some kind of white space and, without knowing it at time, gathered up particular orbs that represented quirks, and once you collected 7 of them, they all merged into one sphere which merged into your body before you were flung through White Tunnel, before you found yourself being flung out of it and ended up being caught by the #1 hero, right? Ken asked, making sure he recalled correctly. Poca nodded to him in confirmation. Indeed, that is very odd. Ken sighed in perplexed exasperation. The worst part is I don't even know who or what caused all this to happen in the first place, or even why. Poca told him in concern. And why me of all people? Why not somebody else like Philip or Leah or even Matthew? I'm just a clumsy nobody. Now I'm going to have to stop you there, because first and foremost, you are anything but a nobody, and second, while you may be a little clumsy, I can tell that you are anything but reckless. Ken told her firmly, half lecturing and half encouraging. While it's true you may not know why you end up involved in all this in the first place, isn't it the same thing that kind of happens to some protagonists in shows who are in a similar situation as you? Some that really and truly believe that they aren't worthy until they make a grand journey to figure things out themselves? Whatever the reason is, it had to be really important that you had to be here. Sure, this is understandably scary and daunting, and you have every right to be worried. But right now I can say with full confidence that so far you're on the right track. Your heart is in the right place. As long as you never lose that hope I can tell, which you keep close to your heart. Are you really sure? She asked, stunning but still both unsure. Wholeheartedly, my dear. He replied, nodding to her. You may have not asked for any of this, and while this probably might sound a bit pretentious on my end, please trust me when I say that you shouldn't despair on the what-ifs, but instead focus on what you can do now. The present right now should be what matters most, even with the future in mind. As long as your heart is in the right place, and you stay true to the sincerity and love within your heart, I believe without a doubt that the goal you seek can be achievable. That you yourself can become a hero in your own right, like the ones you've admired for so long. Whether you have powers or not, the strength of your heart should be what matters more, and if coupled together, great things can be achieved so long as you stay true to who you are in your heart, who you choose to be, and never give up, because that's what will matter more in the end. Stunned to the point that tears started to well up, she felt some kind of weight lifted off her shoulders in a way she couldn't explain, but otherwise was relieved when it did, as all she gave him was a nod as she smiled at him, and he, in his own insect way, smiled back at her. Thank you, she said to him, for she really needed that, calmer than previously as he nodded back at her. He was right. She knew she had to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, never give up, and work her hardest every day to make the future brighter. If she wanted things to be better, then she couldn't run. She'll have to work hard, one day at a time. Whatever happens now is up to her. She will not run away. She will fight. To no one in particular, with only Ken able to hear her, she made her promise. Look out, world, future. Pocahontas 𝗧𝗪𝗏 will become a hero who will save everyone. Dear Diary, the craziest thing has happened to me. Even more crazier than anything else that has ever happened. Even crazier than the one time a traveling gang of troubadours had to bunker down in our orphanage due to the fact that there was a storm so bad that they couldn't travel normally on the roads for days. Which is still pretty weird, as when you think about it, who sees troubadours now these days? The only time I would ever see them is either in a game or on TV. That was until that time 3 years ago. Anywho, to make the long story short, I was making my way to the entrance exam for the school that I wanted to go to, and then out of nowhere a portal opens up and I fall in, and I end up in a white space, started collecting these weird, colorful orbs, only to later find out that these are actually individual quirks, and now I have them all inside of me, basically making me a counterpart of Izuku Midoriya. Yes, you heard me right. Sounds make-believe and cheesy, I know. But I'm telling you the truth that I ended up in the world of one of my all-time favorite anime, My Hero Academia. And on the day of the UA entrance exam, no less. I even got to meet All Might, who caught me, as I got flung out of a portal, and he even gave me directions to the train station. So now I have a new mission. Since in this situation I have full knowledge of what's to come, save the future and be a hero to everyone. No pressure or anything. Thankfully I had time to get to the train, and somehow still, while Ken the dragonfly went to survey the area and spread the word to any other insect out there about everything, have time to find a new place to live with many convenient places to shop, and then some after helping to quickly solve a case for the guy running the place, to eat at and to grocery shopping at and such, get a new and used phone from a garage sale and a few other items too. Suddenly adopt a pet Pomeranian with a quirk who will also be my partner and do a bit of research to help me for the exams all before the actual exams begin. It's all just cray-cray. Which is exactly what I'll write once the day is over. Poca thought to herself as she stood in front of the gate to the very school itself. Yeah, no joke, that's exactly what had happened after she had gotten off the train, as she recollected what took place after the train ride. Ken went to do his own mission while she was left to her own devices, promising they'd meet again at UA later, if not at the entrance then just before the practicals began. Poca was more than happy to not only have a translation quirk in her repertoire, but she had also already learned how to speak Japanese and sign language in both English and Japanese while growing up. So even if translation was suddenly turned off, she would still know how to communicate without any issues. Still, just because she has a quirk that can make communicating with other people from other countries around the world easier, it doesn't change the fact that she would have to still look into the books on those languages if her quirk was suddenly shut off and she was in a foreign country someday, so that she won't be lost. Not wanting to take the chance that if translation goes, then her knowledge on how to speak those foreign languages because of the quirk will go too. Whether that's true or not, she doesn't know yet. After a bit of looking, she found a small but cozy-looking 2-story apartment complex, one that actually reminded her of the one she always saw from Kotaro Lives Alone. Don't worry, folks, she always covers her eyes whenever the monetary bathing scenes came up. And according to her findings, there were 2 unoccupied apartments that she could choose from, and thankfully these apartments had showers, so she didn't have to worry about going to a bathhouse to do any bathing or so. Upon meeting the landlord, though, she decided now would be a good time to put down her hood, allowing her hair to be free from it, yet still somehow remain the same as it had despite having been stuffed into the hood like discarded packed-in hair in a bird's nest. Could tell that something was wrong, and so she asked what was going on, and it turns out that something was haunting one of the unoccupied upper-story apartments. No matter how hard the guy looked, he couldn't for the life of him figure out what was causing the mishaps that he had been facing for the better part of a month, from spooky mishaps to booby traps. The family that used to live in that apartment had to move out because things were getting bad from that and due to other issues they were already facing, leaving a good part of their belongings behind just to escape. Things were so bad that nobody was able to rent it, let alone for long, without suffering any mishaps themselves and being forced to leave almost as quickly as they moved in, though thankfully none of them had to leave their belongings behind like the first family had. Of course, just because she doesn't like the supernatural genre doesn't mean that she believed anything literally haunting could happen in reality, like vampires and werewolves and like, so she volunteered to check it out, to which the man was both baffled and fearful for her. Others have tried but ultimately failed. Some even came out with a few injuries here and there, although she did assure him that everything would be all right. It was only by chance that she came across a strange fellow going into his apartment next to the one that she was going to investigate. Something about him, she could tell, was off. He was carrying some rather suspicious items, and after some investigating upon entering the apartment, it only confirmed who was the true cause of all the terror, as she immediately told the landlord, who, enraged, called the police as he had always been suspicious of the guy, 𝐒𝐭𝐼, but never had any actual proof, and thanks to her, by taking photos as evidence, he could finally evict the guy and have him arrested for all the trouble he caused. 𝗵𝗲 was a jerk and did all he did just to be a jerk and have his sick entertainment for laughs, not caring at all how much trouble he had caused for others, let alone how much physical and psychological harm he caused them, which only made his arrest warrant even worse, especially so when he realized that yes, he was going to go to jail, if not prison, and started crying like a baby begging the police not to, even offering up a big bribe just so he can go scot-free. But nobody listened as, to his horror, that only made his list of crimes even worse. The landlord, Shinichi Heiko, in deep gratitude allowed her, upon hearing her request, to stay there for free for the first 2 months, to which she was stunned but otherwise grateful. Thankfully, the apartment that the guy was terrorizing was still in pretty good shape, just had to remove the traps and the gimmicks, and the apartment looked like it was completely normal again. Good thing I'm already good at finding things, for more than one reason, she thought in gladness. Upon calling the first family who had to move out and who wanted to be informed of the situation going forward, to inform them that the situation had been resolved at last, they were grateful but otherwise declined moving back, as they already found themselves a new comfortable neighborhood to move in and had already long since replaced their furniture. They had already long since taken their personal belongings, so they didn't have to worry about needing to come back to grab anything. Upon seeing the opportunity to not have to worry about buying furniture, Poca had requested to move into that same apartment, because not only would this be completely convenient for her, but this would also show the other tenants and newcomers that everything was back to normal so they wouldn't have to worry, which the landlord accepted. Sure, she would need to do some grocery shopping later on, but that can be worried about after the exams are over. The apartment itself was in her opinion perfect. A decent-sized bathroom, 2 bedrooms, a nice living area/kitchenette with a good working quality fridge, stove/oven, boiling pot, rice cooker, although she knew that getting an extra one wouldn't hurt in case something came up or so. But she'd worry about that later, and microwave, a little slot so she can receive the mail from the door. And the windows had some decently nice views to look out of. Pots and pans, utensils and dishware, a little shoe cubby with guest slippers, umbrella rack, little air conditioning unit, low table and seat cushions, a small but good quality TV and a small entertainment center, curtains in every room, a small couch, futons and desks with desk lamps and seat cushions for them too, good-sized closets and small dressers, a small but good-sized washer and dryer for laundry with the bells and whistles required for both, a laundry basket dolly that could be used for carrying loads of clothes to the laundromats or for clothes shopping if required, towels and bath mats. Even all necessities needed for bathroom and shower use were there too. And thankfully there was no food of any sort inside the apartment that was left behind, because otherwise it would have been a big stinky mess to clean up after. She couldn't ask for more. After getting all the paperwork done and getting the keys, Poca dropped off her moving bag, which was the black bag, carrying only her school backpack with her with all the things needed for the written part of the exam, as after making sure everything was locked up and making sure her last name was on the nameplate, she checked the time. Happy that she still had enough time before the exams, as she decided to take the opportunity to look around the area so that she would know where she was. And also grab a bite to eat, because now she was really hungry. Undoubtedly because of the quirks she needed much more nutrients than normal. That, and she only had that pink lady apple for breakfast and a small snack she had on the train ride earlier, which wasn't much. But before she could leave to check out the area, she ran into an old lady that was having a small, everything must go garage sale. To her surprise, she was able to find a handful of things that she would definitely need, plus, to her surprise, other things that really caught her eye that she had always wanted: a nice winter coat, a rice cooker that was in great shape as it had hardly been used, a snow globe that also functions as a pencil/pen holder, a new hardcover guidebook on Japan, a big, hard plastic box with a lid, full of Legos, Friends Edition, one of her personal favorites, a mini pocket periscope, and last but most certainly not least, an iPhone, Google Pixel 3, and laptop, which were both completely new and unused. In fact, they were still in their casings. All these things were actually the last things she was selling. As Poca was counting up the cost, the older woman then stopped her, telling her that she didn't need to worry about paying, as at this point of time she has acquired more than enough money to donate for her granddaughter's college funds, and so generously, greatly so, decided to let her have all of what she had left for free as a welcome to the neighborhood gift, as well as a thank you gift for getting rid of the nuisance that had been causing them and the landlord such trouble for quite a while. Much to the younger girl's ever-rising shock, as she asked her if this was really okay, to which the old woman said yes and insisted. Poca really could not believe it, and yet it was happening. This was indeed one of the most generous things anyone has ever done for her. The younger girl couldn't remember another time she had profusely thanked somebody so much that she was in tears before today, but nonetheless she would forever be grateful to the kind older woman, as she took it in stride. After dropping off her new things in her new apartment before locking it up again, and putting on her new winter coat, which was a really nice dark blue Athleta downtown puffer parka coat, as it was now starting to get even colder despite her own tolerance towards cold temperatures. Not to mention that the adrenaline from earlier made her resistance towards the cold even higher until it finally started to slow down enough that she actually started to notice how cold it actually was, plus the coat itself was big, long, and thick enough that it would prevent anybody from trying to figure out what uniform she was wearing when she wasn't wearing anything but the clothes she was currently wearing. She soon set off to get a look around her new neighborhood and finally grab a bite to eat. To her surprise but otherwise relief and joy, the small apartment was close by to several places such as a Goodwill, a nice small Japanese restaurant, laundromats, a small convenience/grocery store, a dollar store, bookshop, and even a library. There was even a pet shop close by as a plus. It was just too good to be true, and yet it was all just perfect through and through. Once she had a mental map of the area, the hunger in her stomach soon made its very loud presence known, as she couldn't help but blush when the practical roaring of her stomach was made known. Thankfully she was alone, otherwise it would have been even more embarrassing. Better go eat before my stomach starts to eat itself, she thought as she quickened her pace. Upon entering the restaurant, which was called Simply Japanese with Me, she saw the menu and she was able to get as much food as she could get, all at a seriously cheap price. Thank you. $1 menu items. 2 small simple bowls of Oriental ramen, 4 small beef buns, 2 small simple rice balls with tagine, and a tall cup of wild sweet orange tea with lemon. And for dessert, 2 plain sugar cookies. I know that's a pretty big meal, but given the fact that not only was she starving and she only had very little breakfast that morning, and the other fact that in this case she was feeding for 2, which was both herself and her quirk, as it needed the fuel she needed for the test ahead of her, she's going to need all the energy she's going to get. That and a few other factors you'll learn soon enough. To say she never felt more replenished and filled up in her life would be accurate. Sure, her new quirks had contributed to it, but nonetheless the food this restaurant served was extremely good. Were she a food critic, she would give it 5 stars. And she managed to eat it all pretty quickly. Sometimes in a way she was like Scooby-Doo. She had a high metabolism, so she could easily pack it all in without gaining any weight. Nonetheless, she savored each and every bite she took. And the restaurant staff there were very nice too. After leaving a tip on her table for the staff, she left as she knew she had to go to the library, immediately checking out a book on the history of Japan, knowing that that was going to be an important detail for the exam. Before she could, however, she soon found herself right in front of the pet shop, unable to resist her urge to come in, especially seeing all the cute animals. She soon entered and she was immediately in cuteness paradise. So many kitties and puppies, so many adorable little canaries and parakeets, hamsters, guinea pigs, sweet little mice, fluffy little bunnies, mischievously funny ferrets, and so many interesting reptiles and very pretty fish. Even the common goldfish and such still looked happy in her eyes. She couldn't help but fawn over every little animal, to which this only made the staff chuckle in amusement. She couldn't feel embarrassed at her own reaction, as she'd always loved animals, almost as much as insects. She had wanted a pet since forever, but she knew she could never have one given that human foster homes foster children, not animals, and a number of them that she's been to won't allow pets. It was sad, yet it was still understandable. But now that she has her own place to live, which will allow pets to stay, and despite other things going on in the background, she could finally have a little animal companion of her own. Yes, she was aware that she will have a bunch of little insect friends to keep her company, but to have an animal friend right by her side would also be nice too. You can never have too many friends after all, human, animal, or even insects. She soon heard a distinct barking from a dog as she was pulled away from looking at the fish to turn to the direction of the barking. And she immediately felt like she was going to literally explode from overloading cuteness as her eyes soon laid on the dog, which was in a lone display space for itself. That had gotten her attention was a fluffy white male Pomeranian pup which had rose pompadour eyes and a cute little black button nose. What stole her heart even more was the fact that this pup looked exactly like 𝗵𝗲, the dog that got adopted by 𝗵𝗲𝗄 from the spin-off of Detective Conan, Case Closed, The Culprit 𝗵𝗲𝗄, which is available on Netflix. Upon confronting the pup, ready to give the little guy attention, she was quite literally taken by surprise when, without warning, the 𝗵𝗲𝗄 twin literally popped out of its glass cage and into her arms as she caught him before he could fall, as he immediately proceeded to start licking her face affectionately as this caused her to giggle. his tongue apparently being ticklish to her as he was kissing her with as much love as he could pour out. This only made the staff laugh as it was equal parts funny and adorable. Eventually he stopped and promptly chose to snuggle in her arms as she snuggled back. It was as clear as day that this pup had a quirk, one that allowed him to teleport from one point to another with ease. And the staff confirmed it, as it had only manifested not long after the pup had reached the age for adoption for puppies. Apparently also, according to the quirk animal vet, this quirk allowed the Pomeranian to be a bit smarter than most dogs. He was well behaved and he even understood things more, even that he had a quirk and how it worked. For some weird reason, nobody wanted to adopt him, even though there was literally nothing wrong with him. His quirk made him unique, but other than that he was a normal dog, albeit above average but still, and worst of all, their boss doesn't tolerate quirked animals. In fact, he hates them, and told them that the pup either must get adopted as soon as possible by the end of the month, or they will send the pup to the kill shelter. Poca was horrified by that. How can anybody be that heartless? She had exclaimed in outrage. The staff agreed on that, but their hands were tied. There was nothing they could do to stop it. The man wouldn't even allow staff to adopt the puppy themselves, as he would promptly fire them, and they really needed this job as finding a new one would be a huge challenge. The end of the month was drawing close and they didn't know what to do, feeling heartbroken that nobody wanted to adopt him, let alone that there was nothing they could do to stop their boss from going through with his demands. Even the pup in her arms understood a situation as he whimpered in despair, which really broke her heart more. Poca, in an act of desperation to save the dog and determination to give this little one a chance to live, with such finality in her resolve, proclaimed that she would adopt him. That he would be her little buddy, and she'll even make him her animal hero partner, as she was planning to take the UA entrance exam today. At first, the staff thought that it was crazy, maybe impulsive, and most importantly, quite out of the blue, but nonetheless they could see that she wasn't going to back down even if she herself was surprised by her own reaction, and so they agreed, knowing that this was the only way to save the little puppy from an early demise. Apparently their boss didn't care whether or not payment would be required for adopting the pup, just as long as it was out of their hair, so she was able to adopt him for free, including getting a few necessities she needed for the same thing. She named the dog 𝗵𝗲, after the dog from her favorite funny yet short-lived anime. Soon enough, he was sporting a brand new bright red color with a silver tag that had his name and the phone numbers, both her real and the number she was going to use for her new phone, which she had been told of by the old woman earlier, on it, as well as the address. Engraving on the tag thankfully didn't take as long as she thought it would, as one of the staff just so happened to have a quirk made for that, and so it only took a single minute to get it done, which was a plus in her book. The man's quirk made him perfect for this particular job. He even had a twin brother who had the exact same quirk as him, which was super rare for twins to bear the exact same quirk as the other, as his twin was working at a really nice jewelry shop in another part of the city. Said twin offered his brother a job there if things go south, although the waitlist to get the opening for the shop apparently was about a year long, as they were already dealing with other things on their end, and there was only a 20% guaranteed that the brother would get a job there if things went bad. Even if having both brothers, there would be a great business opportunity for the jewelers. Their rules were pretty strict, and even they couldn't argue with their boss on it. The girl can only give the man her condolences, which he appreciated. The other things such as dog food, treats, dog bowls, dog toys, dog bags, dog shampoo and conditioner, dog brush and toothbrush, and even a cute doggy sweater vest she had requested would all be sent to her place, as she was on a time crunch, although she stuffed a few of the dog bags in one of the bags, a small pocket-sized one, of dog treats into her pockets just in case. To which they agreed, as they proceeded to pack it all up in one box, so delivering it to her place was a breeze. She kept a leash too, but kept it off for the time being, as she didn't want to get in trouble with the authorities. After all was done, she said her goodbye and left the store. A minute after she left, she asked herself if she was crazy, perhaps maybe way too impulsive, but she argued that it was the only way to save the puppy, as he was way too adorable and wonderful to be put in a kill shelter, all because of something that wasn't his fault. There was no turning back. There was no way she was going to abandon the puppy. She'll fight tooth and nail if she had to, in asking the school if she could make her new animal companion her animal partner. Upon being asked if he wanted that, he barked happily, wagging his little tail in excitement, and proceeded to pop into her arms from the ground and started kissing her again. She giggled as she knew this was a yes. Thankfully, she didn't have to worry about feeding him, as he already ate just before she came in, so, upon looking at the time, Knowing that she was getting a little closer, she quickly proceeded to sit at a nearby bench and skim through the history book she just checked out from the library before going into the pet shop. She honestly hates just skimming through important information, but she knew that beggars couldn't be choosers given the time. She especially wanted to learn more about Japan's current history with all the quirks that had come in hundreds of years ago, but again she knew she was on a time limit. She would have to take the time to actually read it properly after the exams were over. All the while, the dog sat by her side quietly and calmly, surveying in the area all the while. After a while, she managed to get through the entire book, only half satisfied at having finished it while she still felt displeasure in just simply skimming through it and not actually taking time to read. She could only hope that she memorized enough that it would be passable for the written portion. After placing the book back in her backpack, she took 𝗵𝗲 into her arms and quickly ran to Yue. Mid-running, the pup promptly popped out of her arms and onto her left shoulder as he perched himself on there. He even had a good firm grip so that even if she was moving he wouldn't fall off. It may seem odd to others, but to her it felt nostalgic, almost like she were a protagonist in an animated cartoon. Upon arriving at the gates, she took the time to stop and catch her breath as she had been doing a lot of fast moving all over the place, hardly allowing herself to catch her breath. Even as other kids her age passed by her, she didn't pay them any mind as she focused on breathing deeply and exhaling so that she could stop her heart from pounding so fast. It seemed like the adapting quirk kicked in as it didn't take her nearly as long as she thought it would as her breathing quickly went back to normal as well as her heartbeat, in a way that made it feel completely natural instead of something that wasn't and would have negative effects on her. Finally, she stood up straight and looked towards the main gate, instantly finding herself in awe at the sight before her. The school itself was amazing. It was beautiful. The architect was just absolutely impressive. The show itself, let alone manga and pictures by themselves, don't do the real thing any justice. That was for certain. The place was so big that it made her feel like a tiny ant. She couldn't help but wonder just how many students would be able to fit into one school like this. Definitely way more than schools in America back in her world, that was sure. Sadly though, as much as she wanted to stay there a little while longer and admire it more, she understood not to waste time as the puppy's barking brought her out of her awestruck daze. Just then she saw someone pass by her, someone all too familiar as she looked, and her heart skipped a beat in shock. There he is. Izuku Midoriya. She thought to herself as yes, she knew that green hair, yellow backpack and red shoes anywhere. The main protagonist of My Hero Academia, All Might's successor, the future hero for all, and her #1 favorite character from the show. She hastily ran to catch up with him as he too stood before the school, but was thinking about him having to swallow the hair and having doubts about when it will kick in. Though that was the least of his worries in her opinion, as there were a few more concerning matters at hand. He still neither had social skills, due to being bullied for being quirkless for years, nor any control of one for all as he literally got it a few short hours ago by All Might. Not to mention that he had little to no fighting skills for obvious reasons. She had to help him, especially in getting his quirk under control quickly and thus ensure that he could get a better score from the practical part of the exam and hopefully lessen Eraserhead's ire, at least a little, and most prominently, spare him from suffering too many broken bones and thus leading to them becoming weaker to the point of risking never being able to use his limbs ever again. She knew at least enough self-defense to help her get by. Hopefully after the exams she'll be able to teach him, if she can manage to become friends with him, maybe even recommend him a dojo or some kind of self-taught lesson videos to help him. Plus, it would be good for him to have a friend at all before the new school year starts, cause everybody needs somebody, right? Stupid Deku. Came the voice of one person she absolutely wanted to strangle right now. Who cares if he had a redemption arc going forward? Right now he was still a grade A jerk. Of course it's Katsuki Bakugo. Like in the anime, upon hearing his voice the greenette turned to look at him, not noticing that someone else was behind him. "Oh Kaken," Izuku said in surprise. "Get out of my way now before I set you on fire," the explosive boy threatened, though in a cold yet calm way. But before the greenette could even say anything in startled fright, he was immediately surprised to see a light brown hair girl step in front of him and outright say, Dude, he's literally not even in front of your direct path. He's on the side, so how on earth is he in your way in any manner? Back off, ponytail. My business with Deku is none of yours or your mangy mutts." Katsuki spat as he gave her a death glare. But to everybody's surprise, especially the two boys, she didn't back down nor replied in how anyone would expect from that. Instead, she said with a very bored, unimpressed expression, Sorry, someone else already has that nickname. Try again. And 𝗵𝗲𝗏 barked as if agreeing with her. Izuku looked at her, stunned at that comeback, baffled by this really, as he couldn't remember another time somebody responded in this way. Ever. Katsuki, who stopped at that, on the other hand, looked at her incredulously as if asking if she was serious before he simply huffed and walked away, not sparing any of them a second glance as he didn't want to waste time arguing with the girl and her dog just before the exams, although briefly in his mind he wondered why she had a dog with her. She doesn't look disabled, not that he cares. Poca let out a sigh. Just being in front of that boy made her feel tired, and none of them even got into a full-on shouting match. In her mind, however, she thought, I knew it was unavoidable, but I don't regret it. I'm not going to let him torment Izuku anymore. I've dealt with bullies before. He's no different, even if he does have the literal power to explode me to smithereens. She soon turned to Izuku as she asked him, You okay? Izuku just looked at her in stunned awe, not believing she had said something like that, let alone intervene, and made his former childhood friend just simply walk away without going into a shouting match of threats or worse, get exploded by him. Blinking hard before suddenly being startled by her dog, who was previously on her left shoulder, as he literally popped into his own arms as he caught him just before he could fall as he started to lick him, trying to make him snap out of it, which had already worked from him simply teleporting into his arms like that. The boy yelped but at the same time chuckled from being licked affectionately like this. She now regretted not bringing her phone, either of them, because this was just too cute. Indeed, she'll look back on this day and rue that she had forgotten to bring one so she could savor the moment. 𝗵𝗲𝗏, give him some space, boy. She exclaimed in giggles from this, as this made her Pomeranian pop back to his previous post. After wiping off the saliva residue on his face, it suddenly struck him like lightning as he immediately asked her in shock and excitement, Your dog has a quirk? Yup. Poca replied, already prepared for him reacting to that, for she knew that he loved quirks and analyzing them especially. 𝗵𝗲𝗏's quirk is a teleportation one that lets him pop from one place to another. How far that range goes is still unknown. This quirk somehow also allows him to be a bit smarter than most dogs, so he can understand what everybody's saying quite perfectly. His quirk is called 𝗵𝗲𝗏. Izuku's eyes lit up in sheer excitement as he instantly pulled out his notebook, writing notes as he exclaimed, That's so cool and super handy. Teleportation quirks are extremely rare these days, and the fact that an animal has one, let alone has one that allows it to have more intelligence than most of their kind, is quite phenomenal and almost unheard of. Considering he's with you right now, I can only assume that you're planning to make him your animal hero partner. That's correct. She readily replied as she then added, Not only is it handy for surprising enemies out of nowhere, but it will also allow him to reach places that most people cannot from their normal sizes alone, since he's small enough to crawl in through spaces or simply teleport into spots where others are not able to for one reason or another. He would also be great for rescue operations, as due to him being naturally adorable, it would help calm civilians down if they're already panicking. It would especially be helpful if children are involved, as children normally love animals, so him being an animal hero partner will make things easier down the line. And due to him having very keen senses, he would know if something was off, be great in helping investigations and finding things in people. I agree. Not to mention that Pomeranians are one of the most popular dog breeds in the world. Nobody would be able to resist him. He could even serve as a distraction with his appearance alone against the enemies, so you could strike in to knock them out or apprehend them. They may be small, but they're both very energetic and protective of their owners, and having a quirk will double both tenfold. Izuku said as Poca could practically see smoke coming off from him writing so furiously. In her mind, she wondered how the paper he was writing on hadn't gone up in flames yet. He's writing faster than a roadrunner with its tail on fire. However, mid-writing he then stopped as he looked back up, surprised that she was able to follow him quite easily despite him going into a muttering storm again, and even contributing to the conversation too with such readiness that he's never seen in anyone around his age. She didn't even look disturbed nor disgusted by him taking notes. On the contrary, she looked quite happy to contribute to the conversation, her face showing fascination for his analysis, even giving him such a friendly smile that he's never seen anybody around his age give him when he hadn't seen in any of his peers in 𝐒𝐻𝐻. You're pretty smart. And your analysis is really amazing. She complimented him with such genuine hope. People often forget that knowledge is power, and when applied to heroics it can make them quite strong and versatile, and not just in the body or even in the quirk alone. Izuku could only blink several times as he nodded, knowing that she was right. I have no doubt that with the kind of know-how you have, you'll make a great hero, she told him, her smile practically shining like the sun. Izuku was more surprised, feeling a kind of warmth he's never felt before from someone around his grade, let alone a girl, feeling a sort of weight lift off his shoulders as he couldn't help but feel like he was going to tear up from being complimented happily and given such genuine praise without even one trace of spite or malice. She didn't ask about his quirk like most kids around his age would, and just focused on his skills in quirk analysis, and not only was able to follow his train of thought but also was able to add more to the conversation without skipping a beat. It was the first time someone like this approached him with kindness, protected him from potentially getting threatened more by Kaken, had asked him if he was okay, and started a conversation with him without asking about his general quirk or status background. It honestly felt like a breath of fresh air for him. Relieving, really. He was pulled out of his daze as she handed him a handkerchief as she told him, "There's no need to cry, it'll be okay." Her dog barked in agreement. With such assuring compassion, he had no doubt that she would make a great hero herself. It felt nice receiving such a thing from someone like her. He sniffled as he gently accepted the handkerchief before dabbing his eyes to stop himself from leaking out tears. The metaphorical weight that he had always felt for years, one of many actually, finally lifted from his shoulders, feeling a sense of freedom he can't remember feeling any other time before. It felt good. Once he was sure he wouldn't cry again, he handed the mostly damp handkerchief back to her as she accepted it and stuffed it into her left coat pocket. "My name is Pocahontas Syra Lathe, but please call me Poca as my name is way too long to say. I just got here from America not too long ago." She introduced herself, then did the same for her dog, and as you have already heard, this is 𝗵𝗲. "My future AHP," she then asked him, "What's your name?" Izuku was a little startled, but he fought back his jitters as he said through his stuttering, Midoriya. I am Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too she said in stride, and please pardon me calling you by your first name. Since I'm from America, I'm more used to calling people by their first names rather than their last names. Alright. He answered with a slight blush. Still nervous, but at the same time understanding given that most Americans are used to the normal customs back in their home states. The same goes for Japanese civilians. If they decide to go to America, they would be used to the default in addressing people by their last names rather than their first names unless they're already familiar with them to the point of friendship or even family. Eventually, the two of them were made aware that they were drawing attention from others, more particularly Poca because of 𝗵𝗲. Mostly hearing them whisper along the lines of her having a dog with her and, mostly the girls, whispering at how adorable her dog was. This made the two teens blush in embarrassment. "We should head inside before we die of embarrassment, or before we're late," Poca immediately said as Izuku agreed with her. 𝗵𝗲 nodded in agreement as the trio began to make their way to the doors, only for Izuku to trip over his own feet and started falling to the ground. "Or I'll just die," he moans in his head, immediately accepting defeat even before he could get started. But then after a moment he realized he wasn't falling anymore but was simply just hanging near the ground, like somebody turned off the gravity on him. And indeed somebody did. "Are you okay?" a girl asked him, giggling as this made him start flailing in surprise. But he soon stopped as he was placed back on his feet by Poca as they both turned to the girl who stopped him from meeting the ground face first. Achiko Uraraka, right on time. Poca expected as the zero-gravity user placed her hands together via the fingertips as she turned off her quirk and said with a smile, "I stopped you with my quirk. I'm sorry I didn't ask first. But I figured you wouldn't mind me catching you." "It's okay," Poca told her, smiling back at her. "Thank you for catching him." Tripping and falling before an important exam is not a good first impression to make, let alone how one wants to start their day. "I'm rather clumsy myself, so I know this only too well." Achiko giggled again as she nodded, saying, "I agree, and yeah, being clumsy can have its downsides. Don't I know it?" Poca said in return. Izuku, still dumbfounded but otherwise stiffly nodded as he stuttered out a "thank you." "You're welcome," Achiko replied, nodding back. Which only made him blush again, not used to being thanked by a girl. "Anyhow, we better get going. See ya," the newcomer said as she waved to them both before running to the building. All the while Izuku shouted in his head in disbelief, "I can't believe I talked to not one, but 2 girls in one day. Only Poca understood what was going through his mind now. She knew it sounded silly, but given his rough childhood, could she blame him? She understood given what she can only imagine what he's been through since he was diagnosed as quirkless years ago. If I ever see any of those idiot-faced jerks, I'll drive them into next week. She silently fumed in her head in anger and disgust at their actions towards the poor boy. And as for the doctor? Dear 𝗔𝗂𝐁𝐴, as much as I never want to meet you in person, like ever, a part of me is still angry at you for everything you've done. And not just how you treated the poor boy that day 11 years ago. If I ever get my hands on you, I'm going to make you feel every ounce of pain you made every person go through. Verbally, physically, and otherwise. She is right, Izuku. She decided to cut in, stopping her train of thought before she could think any further, knowing that they couldn't waste time now, and not wanting to be in a bad mood later. We better get going before we're late. This ultimately snapped the boy out of it as he fervently nodded before they made their way towards the building. Okay, I'm pretty sure at this point none of this is a coincidence whatsoever. Poca thought to herself as she looked around her, surrounded by thousands of teenagers, and was sitting next to Izuku as he was sitting next to Katsuki. This was a 1 in a million chance that she would be sitting next to him and his bully. As 𝗵𝗲𝗺 sat on her lap, obediently staying quiet so to not cause trouble for his owner. Nonetheless, that didn't stop him from looking around here and there with all the activity going on. Poca still recalled what took place earlier before this. Poca had convinced Izuku to go ahead to one of the stands to get checked in while she took another to save time. He was a little hesitant, but eventually agreed as they promised to meet again soon enough. Once he was gone, the true reason for her wanting to separate soon surfaced as she internally started to panic. What in MHA am I going to do? I have no record of existing here. And even if I could appear as a new participant, what are the chances of them accepting a very late participant who hadn't registered early like everybody else has? What am I going to do? She screeched in her head as she furiously rubbed her hands through her hair, trying to think of something, anything, that could help as she walked further away from the other students that were already in crowded lines at the other stands, and as most were more focused on getting registry done and everything, so no human noticed her odd reaction. Are you okay, my dear? Came a voice that made the girl and dog yelp before they hastily looked around before their eyes eventually looked down and met the eyes of none other than the principal of UA High himself, Nizu. Please don't ask. Please don't ask. Please don't ask. Please don't ask. Internally, she panicked and pleaded for this as she spoke. I came to take the exam. She managed to squeak out, forcing herself to speak through her nervousness and fear. But I don't know if I could be accepted given the fact that I never made any registration ahead of time. And I know this seems completely out of the blue, but I've been having a very chaotic time since arriving in Japan recently and getting here, so yeah. I'm pathetic. I'm doomed. I'm a coward. Internally, she reprimanded herself, looking like a scared 5-year-old asking for permission to go to a scary house on their own to prove they are brave, only to actually show how scared they really are. It's no trouble at all, my dear. In fact, you're not the only one who's making a registration this late in the game, the principal assured her. Say what now? She asked, both incredulous and baffled. If the confrontation against the Explosion King didn't cause the sound of a record scratching sharply to emphasize the shock to happen, then this moment most certainly would do it. Indeed, it's what I said. By my calculations, you're the 110th person in the same boat today who has come in to register. The hybrid told her, his smile calming and his voice assuring so the girl wouldn't panic any more than she already was. In fact, I'm the unofficial extra staff member in charge of registering participants in that category. If you can follow me, I can get you the papers you need to get yourself set up. And given the fact that you have your dog with you, I assume that he's not ordinary by any means. She, though stunned, seriously shook her head as she replied, You're correct. 𝗵𝗲𝗺 has a quirk that allows him to teleport from one point to another. This quirk also makes him a little more intelligent than most dogs, and he's well behaved. I would like to ask if I could have him as my AHP. The principal nodded as he led the way to where he was stationed, telling her that he would be more than happy to allow it as it wasn't every day he got to register students who wanted to have an AHP with them, which made a wave of relief come forth for the girl, making her woes and worries finally go down. Once they were there, Poca was given the paperwork she needed to register while 𝗵𝗲𝗺, ever curious about the hybrid and most likely excited to meet another quirked animal, hopped in front of him as the principal volunteered to keep an eye on him while she did her paperwork so there would be no distractions, to which she agreed and thanked him for his generosity. She was only grateful that she took the time to ask the librarian earlier what the date was, feigning that she's been so stressed that she forgot what the current year was. To her joy, the lady did not mind and told her, so she was able to calculate when the year of her birth was if she had been born in this world. And grateful still as she was able to experiment a little bit here and there even before she skimmed through the book she had checked out so she could understand her quirks more before then. Everything else was easy, then came down to what her quirk was. After some pondering, she then figured out the solution. On the section that identified her quirk and description of it, she wrote as follows. Swiss Army knife, also known as multi-tool. Much like one of those pocket items with multiple tools to them, this quirk has multiple powers in one quirk. A super rare quirk that's kept secret to avoid unnecessary attention, especially from those who would bear ill will towards its user. Due to this quirk having only manifested recently, there's still much research that needs to be done. These tools are as follows. Translate, allowing the user to understand any language out there, no matter what kind. Water, allowing the user to manipulate and control water however she sees fit, from freezing to heating to absorbing water and manipulating anything that has water in it, and so much more. Cannot produce water on their own, and must require already having water somewhere for this to be used. Healing is also possible with this. Whatever else this power is capable of doing has yet to be recorded, and it is unknown yet whether or not this is affected by the phases of the moon, much like waves in the ocean are. Healing can heal from any injury so long as it's recent. How far that goes and how much can be healed has yet to be determined. However, recent study has shown that if water and healing are combined, they can both heal wounds more quickly, efficiently, and powerfully done before. Though it is unknown whether or not regenerating lost limbs or organs is possible with this. Insects can control and communicate with insects of any and all forms. Can even telepathically communicate with them. Perfect for reconnaissance, stealth, scare tactics, and intel gathering, and swarming enemies with them. Since most people are afraid of insects, this gives the user a real advantage against anyone opposing them. Detector, able to detect whether anyone is telling the truth or not so long as it's verbal. It is unknown whether or not this will work over the phone video call, and if it'll work through sign language. Although unlike some quirks of a similar caliber to this, the user is able to turn it on and off whenever they feel they need to, although if really emotional the power will remain on or turn on automatically without consent. Adaptation, able to adapt to things quicker than most others can. How this works depends on the situation in general. This also grants them a temporary stat boost when required, like if the user wants to be able to run faster than normal, this quirk will give said user an extra speed boost enough to be faster than most can run quirkless. Even those who have worked out for years in a gym to be in top form, she is able to outrun them, for example. What's more, if, say, the user wants to see into people's memories, then simply mixing adaptation and detector will allow the user to have that ability, although specifically it helps the user look for specific memories in the mind. The same goes for if the user wants to be able to find people or things they're looking for, thus allowing them to create a sonar sensor to help them to find things at a great distance. Detecting anything abnormal in a person regarding their health or mood can also be achieved. Everything varies depending on the case in mind. There's still much to learn regarding whatever or not there are other things the user is also capable of doing. On a side note, this quirk also allows the user to learn things more quickly without many issues. Although if critically emotional, the results will vary depending on the subject. If stress is controlled, then good things will come from it. Hope, if the user has any form of hope, this can allow good things to happen. And if mixed with adaptation and/or detector, it can allow the user to achieve even more than the user can ever think possible, such as temporarily slowing down time, creating energy shields, and allowing the user to extend the range of sonar and memories, as previously noted, than ever before. Telepathy is also possible with this power. Again, this all depends on what's going on and what the situation is. What this quirk is capable of doing also has yet to be verified. If not for my quick thinking and experimenting beforehand since getting on the train, this would have been a big metric load of trouble to deal with later. She thought to herself as internally, she let out a sigh of relief. Doing a once-over to make sure that everything was in order before handing the papers back to the principal, as 𝗵𝗲 took the cue to return to his designated perch as the principal accepted the papers and started to look through them. Poca couldn't help but feel nervous, hoping she did everything right, hoping that he wouldn't ask any suspicious questions, especially at the fact that on the topic of family she only put in her grandfather, as for all she knows he was still alive somewhere out there, even though he has been missing since she was a child. More on that another time. The last thing she wanted was people questioning whether or not she was an orphan, which technically she was, or any questions really, as she was too hesitant to speak about her full background, let alone scared to. She was surprised that the principal was a fast reader, but given the fact that his quirk was high specs, it only makes sense that with him being smarter than humans, this would allow him to read things at a much faster rate than most people could, unless they had a quirk similar to his in that regard, or if they truly have a natural gift of being able to read fast. Once he was done, he simply laid the papers on the table, stapling them together before pulling out a seal, which he promptly stamped into a spot for it, thus giving her his approval to register. Your papers have been accepted. Please proceed to the examination room so you can begin the written part of the exam. He simply told her, as a bigger wave of relief overcame her as she had to stop herself from tearing up as she quickly nodded, thanking him before going in the direction of said room he told her of. Gratefully, that part was easy, as all she had to do was follow the students that got the approval. To say it was tough would be too pathetic of a word to describe the written portion itself. While some parts were easy, such as math, mostly, and English literature, and normal Japanese history before the emergence of quirks and the like. Other parts were quite difficult, such as history regarding quirks, anything relating to politics, and the history of heroism and villainy, including hypothetical situations on how to tackle problems. When it came down to questioning how certain quirks can be applied into scenarios, and what to do in situations if she were already a hero and such, though, it was equal parts easy and at the same time tough. Nonetheless, she didn't give up even when she felt frustrated at herself. She worked diligently, carefully but quickly, so that she could get done, so that she can hopefully have enough time to be able to talk to Izuku and help him get control of his quirk quicker, so he could be a little more ready for the practical part of the exam, as she could see at the corner of her eyes that he was fast in getting answers down. To her, it was no surprise given how intellectually smart he was, so this part of the test was a cakewalk. She worked viciously to get the answers down, trying to put in as much careful effort as she could, trying not to sacrifice earnest effort for scrambled hastiness. Just before her hands were ready to quit on her from how hard and viciously she was writing, to her relief once more she was able to finish about a second after Izuku had. And she couldn't describe how grateful she was that her future partner remained quiet and well-behaved throughout parts she knew would be very critical. He was definitely getting extra treats later. Others were still writing as the two of them were quietly told by the man in charge of this part of the exam, who was 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏, which for Poca was a relief, as while she had great admiration towards Eraserhead, she would rather not have him giving her a glare that made her feel like a timid 5-year-old this early, to leave so that the others could finish and to wait until they got the go-ahead to make their way to the auditorium. Once out of the room, as soon as the door closed before them, Poca made her move. Izuku. The boy turned to Poca as she gestured for him to come closer so their conversation wouldn't be heard. At first Izuku blushed at the implication, but upon seeing her deep look of serious concern he was able to calm down enough to do so, as she then whispered, "You only just got your quirk today, didn't you?" she asked, though it almost felt like she was stating it more than questioning. Izuku flinched back violently in shock, but before he could shout she quickly slapped her hands over his mouth, immediately shushing him, telling him not to scream, telling him that she had an explanation for how she knew. After a few moments of silence, he eventually nodded, though shakily, as they huddled closer, and she told him, "A part of my quirk lets me detect things, and I could tell that you only just got your quirk today, and I can also tell that it's extremely powerful and that given the nature of it you don't know how to control it, let alone how without risking an injury, not yet anyways." And she wasn't lying. Using the combined combination of adaptation and detector, she was able to detect this, thus making it more truthfully genuine. She was only glad that she didn't look any further than on the surface, otherwise she feared she might have gotten a severe headache, as while the power levels were off the charts, the last thing she wanted was to implode her brain. Izuku, still shocked, otherwise nodded, both in defeat and in fear. "But I can help you control it," she proclaimed with assuredness. He perked up in surprise as he looked back at her, who gave him a helpful smile as her eyes sparked with determination. "You're not the only one who is adept in quirk analysis," she told him, placing a hand over her chest, where her heart was, as she continued, "I do know a thing or two about it." And even those who are usually adept at it need a helping hand from another now and then. I know how you can activate your quirk and use it without accidentally hurting yourself. You do? Izuku asked, still shocked but otherwise hopeful. Of course, she promised him, and before you say it, no, this does not count as cheating. This is a fellow hero in training helping another in need. That also means giving them a few tips on how to control their quirk properly and efficiently so there won't be mishaps later. We help one another. That's what heroes do, right? He pondered about it before he nodded, knowing that she was right. Being a hero was more than just helping civilians who needed help. It also meant helping out your fellow heroes. 2, no matter what it may be. And if he wanted any hope in making sure he didn't blow the practical due to a lack of to-know control of one for all, then he was willing to accept her help. If her quirk was capable of detecting such things, then it will make it easier for them to figure out how much power he can wield currently without risking an injury. Moving further away from the door to give them some space, the two began their little session as she told him, think of your quirk like the heat gauge from a gun or superpower attack in a video game. Go all out too quickly and there will be trouble. You got to start out small and work your way up, see how far your body can take it before you start to feel any straining. And don't just channel it into one part of your body, channel it throughout your whole body to distribute it evenly. It'll feel more natural that way. Start at 1% and work your way up. Reach for that power inside and concentrate. The moment you feel any form of pain, just stop. There's no need to risk your physical health for the sake of progress. Got it? 𝗵𝗲 barked lightly, agreeing with her from his humble perch. He nodded as it made sense. Going all out right away will only lead to a world of trouble he'd rather avoid right off the bat. How she explained it made perfect sense, as in a way his quirk was like that. And like other teenagers, he too has his own fair share of games, so he knew exactly what she was talking about, including some that have that specific kind of gauge or mechanic at certain points and levels. Closing his eyes, he did as she instructed. Internally, he reached out for the power inside. A moment later, he felt the power start to come to him. Slowly, he started to let the power flow through his body, starting at 1%. It felt foreign and yet it felt right. He was briefly amazed by how it felt, as it almost felt like putting on a warm, comfy blanket, wondering if this is what it felt like to have a quirk. But he stopped himself from thinking further as he knew he needed to concentrate. Distractions won't help. He can think about this part later. So far so good, and his body didn't feel any sort of pain. It really felt natural. Experimentally, he started to move his hands and feet slowly, even with his eyes closed, to make sure there wasn't any straining or pain. It almost felt like electricity was coursing through his body, but in a way that felt more like energy than anything. Soon he upped the power to 2%, still the same, then to 3%, then 4%. Upon reaching 5%, he felt a slight bit of strain, but not enough to be uncomfortable or cause serious injuries. More like he was stretching himself a little too much, but not enough to warrant any worry. All the while, Poca watched vigilantly to make sure he was doing okay, trusting him to not go overboard as she instructed, as she had the sensor turned off for now. On the outside, she was calm, but on the inside, she was smiling at seeing the familiar green electricity course through the boy's body. It was only when he tried to go to 6% did he immediately stop, letting go of the power as it faded, as he hissed slightly in pain. It stung, yes, but he still feels okay. He turned back to her as he told her, 5%. I was able to reach 5% without any problems, besides only feeling a slight bit stretched. Trying to go to 6 was what made me stop. Because you felt the pain and did as I told you, she deduced as she gave him a proud smile, voice filled with relief. Good, I'm glad you listened. Looking down at his hands, he slowly started to smile as he felt happy to have made progress before the next part of the exams came. If not for her help, he would have undoubtedly badly hurt himself and left himself incapacitated, and thus failed the next part of the exam. If 6% was enough to sting, much like pricking your finger on a sewing needle, but only if said needle had struck the entire body at once. Undeniably, going any higher would have caused more pain. How far and high that pain will be, he'll have to figure that out if push comes to shove. Or asked her if needed. Looking back at her, he smiled appreciatively as he said, Thanks, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. If not for you, chances of passing the next part of the exam would have been impossible. She smiled back as she replied, You're welcome. I'm glad I was able to help. But then she told him, somewhat lecturing though gently and in a friendly way, But remember, just call me Poca. I honestly don't mind, as I'm more used to being called by my nickname rather than the last or even my first. 𝐒𝐻. The boy blushed, still feeling a little uncomfortable as he's never called anybody by a nickname other than his childhood friend turned bully. But if she honestly didn't mind, if having friends meant something as simple as this, then he will try, though that won't stop him from faltering here and there. Right, Laya. Poca. He stuttered out, to which she gave him a glad smile and an approving nod, which helped him to relax. Just then he saw as though a thought just occurred to her as she then told him, but serious this time, before I forget, let me give you one more piece of advice. There will be times you'll need to go all out if the situation is dire. And I know that in itself will be unavoidable. Nonetheless, you need to understand when it does come down to it and not just go off willy-nilly. If it does become that severe, channel more power into the smallest parts of your body in order to prevent yourself from becoming a liability, like channel it into your fingers and toes. That way, even if they do end up becoming injured, you won't be completely incapacitated. Only channel it into your limbs if you absolutely have to, if you need a little more strength behind you. And don't do it at 100% immediately unless you absolutely have to. Just reach for any power level between 5 and 100, so that way the aftermath won't be as grisly, even if it will become painful and even brutal. That way, even if you do become injured, it won't be as dire. There's only so much that the human body can take, and the last thing you want is to permanently damage your bones from repeatedly breaking them to bits over and over again to the point of not being able to move for the rest of your life. And while I understand that heroes often make sacrifices for the greater good, you're still young, you have plenty of time to train your body more so you can will more of your quirk and learn more about heroism so that you'll be able to do things more efficiently. You won't be able to help others if you do not take care of yourself, and that also includes making sure you train properly and don't injure yourself too badly, continuously, and cripple yourself to the point of permanent damage. Letting yourself become reckless in that regard will only cause more harm for you in the future, not just for yourself but for others too. Everybody needs to take a break every now and then, even heroes in training. Remember to let yourself recuperate every once in a while, otherwise it will lead to counterproductive progress or worse on your end. Got it. He was stunned by her concerns for him. Even though they only just met today, he could see in her eyes that she really does care about whether or not he was all right and in good shape or not. She was looking out for him. Something nobody else around his age range has ever done since he was diagnosed. It felt nice to receive that. He nodded as she was right again, because it was all very true. There's only so much that the human body can take before it finally collapses in on itself, and while endurance and pain tolerance can be built up, it should not come at the price of sacrificing any functionality in his body in the future. And there will be times he will need to go all out, go plus ultra, if the situation was grim enough. But if he can do so in a way that it won't leave him as a burden and leave himself unable to help anybody and become an easy target for the enemy to kill afterward, then it'll help him in the long run. He had to remember that he was still a rookie, both in training in how to be a hero and in using his quirk. He still had plenty of time before even thinking about the provisional license exams and such. He can take the time to train his body so that he'll be able to use more than just 5% without any problems. Using a percentage outside of the safety zone only when absolutely necessary and understanding how necessary it was, let alone how much could be used without things ending badly for him. Bajy himself right away will only endanger lives rather than save them. And it honestly reminds him of the lecture that All Might gave him a few months ago about overdoing things. Overwork will lead to bad progress. Not taking care of himself will only lead to inadvertently harming his body more in a way that will be damaging. The line between upping one's training and going overboard has to be drawn. Otherwise, the consequences later would be too great to handle. He learned that the hard way when he tried to secretly up his own training by himself behind his back, secretly diverging off the plans the man had originally made to try and make himself stronger, and in the end he crashed pretty hard for it. Even just thinking about it now only made his body feel like it was going through it again, as he couldn't help recalling the soreness, the pain, the overwhelming nausea and disorientedness that had hit him all at once there. Everyone needs a break now and then. Even All Might needs a break given his current state. He has seen that. He could not forget it. It was the first time somebody told him that he needs to take care of himself more, but not in a bullying way, and to take breaks every now and then outside of his mom, and not just from his hero either, but from somebody around his age too. How can he help others if he cannot take care of himself too? It's true that he will need to make sacrifices someday, but he needs to know when it's necessary. Endangering his own life repeatedly will only bring ruination. At the end of the day, they were all human, himself included. Everybody is bound to get tired or hurt every now and then. Everybody needs time to relax and recover. Whether you have a quirk or not, everyone feels the same thing. The same goes for him, right? Being acknowledged that he was just as human as everybody else by her. It felt like nice. Besides, now that his big 10-month training montage was over, he can now train at a slower but otherwise still productively good pace that won't leave him practically tired, sick and sore to no end like he had been feeling the past 304 days. He wasn't on a huge time crunch anymore. Sure, he will need to learn how to manage more of his quirk before the new school year started if he does pass the exams, but he was no longer in such a big rush, so he could afford that luxury. Got it, he replied after a long period of silence for pondering. He smiled at her again as he nodded and said, "Thank you." She nodded back as she told him, "You're welcome." 𝗔𝗂𝗁. This surprised him, well more than that actually, but not in a bad way. She said, 𝗔𝗂𝗁 and not Deku. You can do it, not you can't do it, not defenseless Izuku. She. Before he could think about it anymore, however, Blood King approached them both, gaining their attention, to let them know that the written part of the exam was done and told them the way to the auditorium, so they could get started on the next part. Although from the corner of her eye she could easily tell that the man really wanted to say hi to her puppy, maybe even cuddle and play with him, but couldn't as he had to remain professional. And she can't blame him considering that he has a dog at home himself. Maybe they can work something out at the end of the day? Poca had said 𝗧𝗵𝗲 on purpose because she meant it. She always hated Deku as in worthless, like how Katsuki Bakugo had put it. She always preferred Deku as in you can do it, like how Ichiko put it. Besides, Deku could also be short for 𝗧𝗵𝗲, so that name can be taken and turned into something good. If this was one of the ways she can also help Izuku, then she was more than happy to assist. As stated before, it turned out that they were seated next to each other, which they found out on their way to the auditorium. It left them both stunned but otherwise made them feel glad, so they wouldn't feel alone in a giant room filled with thousands of teens they didn't know, more for Izuku than Poca, but still. As expected, it was going to take a while for everybody to find their seats before things could get started given the number of participants. A number which the girl really did not want to know as she couldn't even think of how big that number would be for the exam every single year, normal and otherwise combined. Sure, she could ask Izuku, but she'd rather wait, at the very least, until the exams are over before even asking, as the last thing she wanted was for her to be dumbfounded throughout the presentation and look like an idiot from the answer. Upon seeing Izuku become nervous again, she gestured to 𝗵𝗲 to give him some comfort, which he was more than happy to oblige as he instantly popped out of her lap and into Izuku's and started to snuggle against him. Though he was startled by this, he nonetheless started to reciprocate and pet him, his approving chirps, so to speak, slowly starting to help the boy calm down as the puppy leaned into his caring touch. Katsuki, meanwhile, had been giving Deku a distasteful glare. Still despised him but was mostly mad to be sitting next to him, although even he himself can't argue with the rules, as if any students came from the same school as others they have to sit in a designated spot depending on circumstances. It was all at random and they had no say in the matter of who they sat with, whether from their school or from another. They were the only two from their middle school who came, so it could not be helped, but that didn't mean he had to like it. Although he did see the girl and her mutt from before sitting next to Deku, he was still annoyed by her from earlier, baffled by what she had said, because yes, it sounded odd and no one has ever answered him in that way, but nonetheless annoyed. He was, however, surprised to see her dog instantly teleport out of her lap and into Deku's. That mutt has a quirk? He thought to himself, as this was his first time ever seeing an animal with a quirk, outside of the principal of this school, but he hasn't met him personally, so it doesn't exactly matter. Still, he had heard about animals having quirks occasionally, but this was his first time ever seeing one having such a thing. Though his surprise quickly dissipated as his scowl returned just as quickly. I only remember vaguely about something relating to some heroes having quirked animals as partners. She must be planning to make that mutt her future AHP. PFT doesn't matter, they can drown in a tar pit for all I care with stupid Deku. I'll become number one and nobody can say otherwise. A pun. Looking at the girl one last time to give her a glare too, Katsuki was immediately surprised. No, actually, and never thought this would be said for him. Greatly startled to see her looking back at him and shooting him a quick but extremely venomous glare, like she absolutely knew of all the crimes he'd committed, so potent like it really could kill him. So much so that he almost forgot where he was before. It quickly vanished just as quickly as it came as she focused her attention on Deku and her dog. Smiling as the greenette was smiling at her dog, now calmer than before as if nothing happened. What was Dash? But his train of thought was interrupted when the lights finally turned off, indicating that things were about to begin as he chose to deal with it later. Hamataro took that as his cue to pop back into Poca's lap, which he did as Izuku gave her a brief nod of thanks, and she gave him a nod of you're welcome before they turned their attention to the stage. As soon enough, a spotlight shined down on a podium where Present Mike, the voice hero, stood as the white backdrop behind him showed the logo for the school. Honestly, I still don't think I want to know how much hair gel it takes to get all that hair to go up the way he makes it. Poca thought to herself as she was still baffled by this after all these years. It still looks rather ridiculous to me no matter how iconic it is. Is his hair, or his skull, even still able to breathe from all that gel? What's up, UA candidates? Thanks for tuning in to me, your school DJ. He announced with a flashy smile. Come on, let me hear ya. But there was nothing but silence. It was so quiet you could practically hear a pin dropping. Sorry, sir. She silently thought in her head, somewhat hoping that he could hear her, although she didn't have the telepathy part of her quirk on and she didn't want to get in trouble. Though seriously, you can function as your own microphone without your quirk on as your voice is already loud. Do you really need a mic stand? But he took it in stride as he continued. Keeping it mellow, huh? That's fine, I'll skip straight to the main show. Let's talk about how these practical exams are going to go down, okay? Are you ready? Poca, right on cue, shoved her left hand over Izuku's mouth to stop him from muttering altogether, which made him turn to her in surprise, only for her to give him the quiet gesture with her right, silently telling him that it's best not to accidentally cause a disturbance around the other candidates for talking. By stopping him muttering here, even though there's no malicious intent behind it, I can help him avoid getting lectured by Tenya. She thought to herself as that always annoyed her. She always hated people accusing others of things they didn't do and not allowing them the chance to even explain themselves that it's not true. Sure, Tenya Ito was not a bad person, he was just a stickler to the rules and he tends to be a little too stiff and stern at times, but how he treated Izuku before, and the fact that as far as she recalled, he hadn't once apologized for his own behavior towards the greenette, especially at drawing unnecessary attention on the poor boy, putting more stress and pressure on him than he already had to deal with, really burned her up something fierce. She has been bullied before and has seen many others get bullied and picked on too. Even if some of the people's actions weren't malicious, sometimes even good intentions can lead to consequences, as some of those victims ended up becoming nerve-wracked and upset afterwards, which wasn't good at all, even to the point of becoming even worse than that. If that blue-haired, straight-laced roadrunner even thinks about accusing him of anything, I am going to throw the book at him. She silently vowed, as despite her usually being very emotional, sympathetic and timid at times, and clumsy, the one thing she cannot tolerate above everything else is bullying and abuse of any form. In fact, if there was a word stronger than hate, she would most certainly use it. Izuku's eyes widened, catching her point as he nodded, and she nodded back as she let go of him so they could focus on the presentation, ignoring Katsuki as he looked at them from the corner of his eye. Like your application says, today you rockin' boys and girls will be out there conducting 10-minute boss battles in super hip urban settings. After I drop the mic here, you'll head to your specified battle centers. Sound good? Okay. He told them as they all looked at the cards that were in front of them that had been face down at the seat, which would reveal which center they would be going to. As much as I'd like to be in the same center as Izuku, so we can work together, as there's nothing in the rules that says we can't work together, the chances of both of us ending up there are still low. What are the odds? Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when she flipped over the card and saw, to her ever-rising shock and causing her jaw to drop hard, she indeed was going to be at the same as the new one for all user. She showed him, and unintentionally Katsuki, where she was going. Izuku, upon seeing it, was shocked too as he looked back at his card and hers to confirm, though he couldn't help but feel a little worried as he could see that she was way more shocked than he was. I see, so they're splitting us up so we can't work with any of our friends. The explosive user noted. That snapped Izuku and Poca out of their shock as Izuku said, yeah, you're right. Our examinee numbers are one after the other, but we're assigned to 2 different battle centers. Though examinees who already happen to know each other from different schools ending up in the same designated center is all chance at best. Not to mention that they're most likely testing to see how well we work with others if we choose to work together during the practical, as there's nothing in the rules against teamwork if anyone desires to do so or do equal parts team up in soloing. Poca noted too, though a little more quietly but still audible enough for them to hear her, not to mention that during these exams, according to the rules, they are going to emphasize to the candidates to not attack each other for sabotage or malicious intent as it's forbidden, and it goes against what heroic schools are teaching to its future candidates. Undeniably, you'll be kicked out if you go against that. Izuku, who had turned to her, agreed with that deduction as well as he added, "That's true. Besides, according to the printouts, we're going to be facing off against robots, not actual people, and those robots would be serving as villain targets for us to take out. After all, being a hero wasn't just about taking down villains. Even heroes are paired up together every now and then, whether by choice or not, to take on bad guys in cases, and he's seen a number of examples to prove it. And being a hero wasn't about hurting people for sabotage or for ill will. Otherwise, you would be no better than the villains you fight against." Katsuki scoffed softly as he didn't say anything. "I was really looking forward to crushing him. That girl and her fleabag mutt. Whatever, not like they're going to pass this part of the exam anyways. Why do I feel and that's going to come back and bite you in the butt later, Katsuki Bakugo? Vibe rising?" Poca wondered as she somehow got that vibe from him, even though she wasn't using any of her quirks to tell her that. She already knew what the outcome would be, albeit this time it'll be a little different thanks to her intervention, but still. Poca pretty much tuned the rest out as she knows what to expect, having watched this enough times to repeat it herself. Physically, however, she made it look like she was paying attention, so nobody would reprimand her. Internally, though, she pondered on how she was going to tackle this case. Despite having already done some experimenting earlier, the rest of how she was going to conduct herself using her quirks was going to be mostly guesswork, and from what she remembered from observation either from TV or from reading numerous stories and mangas and on the web for years. The old saying, "Kids, don't try this at home," sadly cannot be helped as given circumstances she hadn't any choice but to risk it. There were still too many unknowns, but she was going to have to try and tackle each of them one at a time, for both during and after the exams are over. No pressure or anything. She thought to herself sarcastically with uncertainty and dread. "Excuse me, sir, but I have a question," called the voice of the very person she was thinking again moments ago, as this brought her out of her train of thought. "Tenya Ida," Poca exclaimed in her mind as she turned to the direction of where he was. "Hit me," the voice hero said, giving the young man the go-ahead as the spotlight turned on overhead for the boy at where his seat was assigned as he stood up. "On the printout you listed 4 types of villains, not 3, he explained, almost accusatory with all due respect. "If this is an official error on all UA materials, it is shameful. We are exemplary students. We expect the best from Japan's most notable school. A mistake such as this just won't do. Never thought I'd say this or think this, but up close in person, not only does the uniform that Tenya is currently wearing make him look like a dork in a grown-up way, but the way he is saying this almost makes him look responsible in a high-class snobby way." Poca thought to herself briefly. Still, he better not. "Additionally, you with the unkempt hair," Tenya then called out, turning to our direction as he pointed at Izuku, which startled him as he pointed at himself, wondering what he was accusing him of. Poca felt herself twitch in irritation. "Oh no, he isn't. You've been muttering this entire time. Stop that. If you can't bother to take this seriously, then leave. You're distracting the rest of us," he told him, making Izuku flinch. He did, she thought as she snapped. "Shut your trap right now, Roadrunner." Poca shouted at him with a vicious glare as she stood up from her seat as 𝗵𝗲 leapt off of her lap to stand on the desk and growled at the boy upon sensing his owner's anger, getting everyone's attention as they all turned to her, the blue-hair boy included, as a spotlight now came on for her too, though she ignored it in favor of giving the boy the lecture of a lifetime and protection her new friend. He was just making a notable deduction, and there's nothing wrong with that. Besides, he wasn't the only one who was talking, you know. All 3 of us were talking. Additionally, why are you only accusing him of doing something wrong when you should be accusing all of us of it too? Unless you have a particular problem with him, even though he hasn't really done anything to warrant it. Stop it. You're being a bully in that regard," she told him straight up, slamming her right fist into the desk hard in front of her, emphasizing her intolerant rage. Being a hero also means having a tolerance towards anything that is considerably distracting or what have you. If these tiny things really bother you that much, then leave. Straight up calling out someone for one tiny harmless thing will only bring more pressure and anxiety on the poor soul than what they're already dealing with, and you're only going to make their situation more harder to deal with for the next upcoming part of the exam. Being picky and snappy at the tiniest things is anything but heroic. How would you feel if somebody did that to you, Buster? Now shut your trap and let Present Mike finish his presentation. I'm pretty sure he was already going to explain what the fourth obstacle was going to be, and all you're doing right now is being a hypocritical bully. Now stop it. Capiche? 𝗵𝗲 barked at him to back her up. Poca quickly called out, and no. Don't you dare say anything bad about 𝗵𝗲. He's going to be my future AHP, so there's literally nothing wrong or against the rules in saying that I can't have him with me for this part of the exam. Go accusing anybody of doing something wrong, even though they literally hadn't again, and I'll report you to the teachers. Do I make myself clear? This left the brunette stunned as the color from his face immediately drained from him. Realization now dawned on him as he couldn't do or say anything to counter it. Izuku looked at her in shocked awe, not believing that somebody he'd only just met today was defending him once more. And even making points on why this kind of behavior towards him must stop. In her eyes, he could tell that she was the type that really did not tolerate this kind of behavior. Izuku was going to apologize, but he was stopped by her as she defended his honor and showed defensiveness for her dog too. He really could not believe this was happening. He was pinching himself, but nothing changed. Does she really care about me that much to stand up and defend me like this? Even at the risk of her gaining attention to herself like this? Izuku thought, both in disbelief and at the same time feeling rather touched by her caringness towards him. Katsuki, meanwhile, looked like he couldn't decide whether to be annoyed by her abruptly acting like this or laughing at the blue-haired idiot for making a fool of himself. Though, in favor of not gaining any annoying attention in a certain manner, he chose instead to stay quiet. Shame was now present on the engine user, especially when all around them people started muttering and quietly talking to one another, agreeing with her and even calling him out for being a jerk, as he quietly sat back down, keeping his head low so to not cause trouble again. Sorry, Tenya, but you really forced my hand here. I will never tolerate bullying or false accusations, no matter what the intent is behind them, she said in her head, almost tempted to use telepathy to tell him this, but she stopped herself for the sake of avoiding too many uncomfortable questions and of being accused of something herself. She let out a heavy sigh as the little Pomeranian took that as his cue to stop growling and calm down, before straightening her posture and turning to the voice hero as she then said respectfully, "Apologies for that, sir. Please continue with your presentation." "No worries, little miss. You're good. I understand where you're going with it," the man assured her as he then went on to explain what the fourth obstacle was. Once he was done, Tenya thanked him for the explanation and apologized for his rudeness. Although that only made the multi-quirked girl clench her hands into fists in irritation at the fact that the boy hadn't outright apologized to her friend, even though he already apologized to the hero before them. "I'm going to give you an earful for this later. I know where you're going to be, mister," Poca vowed as, to her surprise, Tenya flinched and looked around as if he had heard something, even though nothing was said as Present Mike continued the presentation without issues as Poca herself sat back down in her seat as 𝗵𝗲 chose to lay on the table, but nonetheless paid attention to everything. Did I inadvertently use it? Or was it one of those, "I got a bad feeling that someone's talking about me" moments I've seen in comic dubs? She thought to herself as she made a note to herself about this later, and work on making sure nothing slipped if it was the former. The rest of the thing continued like it had originally, without another hitch. By the end, they were all shown where they would get changed, and where the bus would be so they could go to their assigned areas. With the promise to meet by the assigned bus, Poca and Izuku parted ways so they could get changed in the locker/bathrooms for boys and girls, respectively. While there, Poca excused herself so she could use one of the stalls, specifically one that she knew would not be caught by the security camera inside due to the angle and positioning it was in. Meanwhile, 𝗵𝗲 was being watched over by one of the participants who was a fellow dog lover, and her family owns an adoption center for dogs and so was more than happy to look after him for a little bit. Plus, not only was she very adept in changing clothes quickly, so she was already done before everybody else, but was also looking for new material to post to her Instagram. And since the Pomeranian was a natural source of cuteness overload, she had the pup make poses with her and promising to make edits so the ID on the tag wouldn't get seen by anybody else online, because yes, she may be an Instagram user, but she wasn't careless about people's privacy, including the ID tags of their pets, as she'd shown Poca proof of her word, so that she could share the cute photos on Instagram with all of her followers. The pup himself, meanwhile, was happy to oblige and make a brand new best friend too, and dozens more, as all the other girls who were either still changing or had already finished changing were giving him all their undivided attention, because who in the world could ever resist a cute Pomeranian? Once the door was closed and locked, Poca looked around and she was pleasantly surprised to see a small air vent right behind a toilet on the right side. Perfect, she thought to herself as she got to work. Going to make sure to get this done quickly and make sure she can meet up with the greenette. Putting down her bag, she unzipped it and took out the things that she needed for this task, grateful that despite her being in a rush, she had remembered to do this before leaving all the rest of her belongings in her new apartment. A box of rubber gloves, which she immediately put on before grabbing everything else, a brand new ballpoint pen, the notebooks that she wrote everything down in regarding the timeline of this world, an extra-large packaging envelope lined with bubble wrap inside that she could put the notebooks in, and a Phillips head screwdriver. She had also brought the flatheads just in case. Once the notebooks and a quick but super detailed 3-page letter she quickly wrote down before everything else were inside the packaging envelope, and it was sealed up tight, and the address was written, the school's address, that is, as, after worrying briefly, to her relief, one of the girls just so happened to be talking about the address of this very school to her mom on the phone by chance, so Poca was able to memorize and write it all down. And addressing it to the principal, she carefully and quietly unscrewed the bolts from the grate to the air vent and carefully slid the package inside, happy that it was able to fit in there, though only by a hair, before she carefully putting the grate back on and the screws back in without anybody noticing. Now all she needs to do is put away everything and go look for a teacher so that they would find what's stuck inside the vent, and that would be the end of that. From a few time travel and OC from our world 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 she's read and favorited over the years from fanfiction and AO3. If there was anyone who can get everything organized, planned, and straightened out, all while keeping the information safe from anyone with malicious intent, it was none other than Principal Nizu himself. Hopefully he won't recognize her handwriting, as, to make sure nothing would be traced back to her, she wrote in a completely different handwriting style that wasn't from America or even Japan. She'll allow the heroes to take care of things while she herself takes care of other matters in the background, all while keeping a low profile, cause again she didn't want to take a chance that there might have been a villain that had transported her to this world and could possibly be secretly spying on her somehow. As far as anyone knows, she was just plain old normal Pocahontas Syra Lathe, a new transfer from America, hoping to become an underground hero, who also is more perceptive about things than most kids her age. She could only hope that she was doing everything correctly, as she thinks. Here's to hoping nothing blows up in my face the very next morning. Once all was said and done, she took off the gloves and threw them into the toilet, packed up her screwdriver and pen and zipped up her bag, then proceeded to take off her coat, revealing the clothes that she had been wearing that morning when everything started, gathered her coat and backpack together before flushing the toilet with her left shoe on the handle, and leaving the stall, making it look like she was just using the bathroom while also getting changed privately in there. As for some of the other participants, she wasn't the only one who was doing the very same thing, minus what she did with the air vent. Once she locked up her things in a locker she chose close by, with 2 locks for extra security, and she wasn't the only one thinking the same thing, although that number was only a few, and in an even smaller group some were putting 3 on their chosen lockers. Talk about extreme. With the little keys for the locks she slipped into an inner pocket inside her front right pants pocket. And having picked up 𝗵𝗲 and thanking the girls for keeping an eye on him and them thanking her for allowing them to interact and play with him, to which she blushed, saying you're welcome to them all, feeling a touch embarrassed. They even cheered the duo on to give it their all, which only made Poca blush more. She and the puppy left the room, but without warning they had bumped into somebody as Poca stumbled back before she felt a pair of hands grab her to straighten her up so she wouldn't fall over. Sorry. She immediately apologized. Don't be, hun, it's not your fault. It was mine for not looking where I was going. Upon recognizing the voice, she immediately looked up to see Midnight, better known as Namuri Kayama, the rated-R hero in her iconic hero costume, which she still thought was really uncomfortable to her eyes, not to mention to her it was not the right thing to wear in a school, hero or not. Don't get her wrong, she was very well aware that as a teacher she cared very deeply about her students and will do anything to protect them, and was a good hero. It was just, sometimes the way she talked and the way she flaunted her body was not appropriate. For show or not, it just wasn't right, although she didn't voice it out because she didn't want to be rude to the woman in front of her. I apologize for bumping into you too. I was just coming to check on the rest of you ladies to make sure everything was going well, the older woman explained, her smile calm and yet excited to get started on the next party exam. Not that she blames her, she then said while happily petting 𝗵𝗲, who happily leaned into her loving touch, and to make sure none of you are being naughty by cheating or sabotaging the other, and as well to make sure all of you are able and ready for the exam itself. It's a standard procedure, you understand. It's fine, it's perfectly understandable. All of you want to make sure the exams go on without a hitch and make sure you don't let in anyone who only has foul intentions in mind. Poca replied, internally trying to fight back her own heartbreak as she soon got to the point that needed to be done. By the way, madam, I think there's something stuck inside the vent in stall number 9. It sounds a little worrying. Would it be possible for you to check it out to make sure nothing is amiss? Yes, she had angled the envelope in just the right way that it would start to make an odd sound so that anyone nearby would hear it, thus adding a little more weight to her claim. But, of course, just leave it to me. In the meantime, you better head on to the buses if you're already done. The indigo blonette told her. Yes, madam. Poca replied, giving her a quick goodbye before heading off. Once she knew she was far away from the teacher, she knew it was safe to let out some tears as the flashbacks of what happened in Season 6 brutally crashed into her mind. Midnight trying to use her quirk to put 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to sleep, or at least slow it down, only to end up getting hit by giant pieces of rubble and debris by Mr. 𝗵𝗲 and end up getting badly injured and left stranded in the forest after a long painful descent. Quickly using the last of her strength to contact 𝗵𝗲 to tell her the chemical formula for her quirk so that she can make it and put the giant to sleep with it, knowing that the older woman herself was going to die as a gang of villains was getting closer to her, and in the state she was in no way, shape or form fit to fight them off and come out of there alive. Poca didn't need to see the body to know that the aftermath was ugly. The pained, horrified, and tearful looks of her students upon finding her body was just heartbreaking. Even more so when they had thought that she was still alive earlier, only to find out later that evening that she had been killed right after contacting Momo. It was all during the attack on the League of Villains as well as the Paranormal Liberation Front, which was formerly called the Meta Liberation Army. She and countless others, including Majestic and Crust, were all brutally murdered, while a handful of others were gravely injured like Gran Torino, or badly crippled in one way or another like Mirko and Eraserhead, or scared up like Hawks, from almost getting burned alive by Dobby and Lady, from trying to slow down 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and helping the students get the formula into his mouth. To name a handful of those she could think of at the top of her head, she was aware of at the moment among everything going on. Even Twice and Lady Negant, with the former having to be killed because of how devastating his quirk was to the heroes, already adding in how bad things had gone for him in his past, especially at the point of questioning whether he was his real self or not after so many of his clones had killed each other a while back, while the latter suffered nearly dying by All For One's hands after she'd failed to take out Izuku. She suffered so much from being taken in by the HPSC to be a hero only to realize she'd only just been trained to be an assassin, a living weapon to annihilate anybody, even other heroes. That would make people question the HPSC's motives and/or dig up and reveal any dark secrets that they didn't want the public to know, and was framed for a crime after she had killed the previous president for his follies and his own crimes. Neither of them deserved to suffer. They deserve to get a second chance to make things right and to live more happier lives. The same goes for Himiko Toga, Shuichi Iguchi, Manami Aiba, and Danjiro Tobita, even Kaizomi Akaguro. All of them would have been great heroes if someone could have given them a chance. The war. That horrible war. The never-ending violence, the mayhem, the siege of death, so many casualties, collateral damage as well as fatalities, all of it was just horrific. It was all just pure madness, chaos, pure ruination in its most devastating form imaginable. That war simply just made World War II look like nothing but a huge scuffle at the playground between a couple of 5-year-olds, at least in her opinion. In the aftermath from after the PLF had retreated was just another living nightmare after the last, with many more to pile on top soon after that. It would become too much for many to handle, leading to some to quit from everything being too much, even though doing so would only make the situation even more worse on an astronomical level. Endeavor. He may have been a jerk and a monster towards his family, but he did have a redemption arc like Katsuki. The man did genuinely regret everything he had done to his family. Yet in the end, he suffered far more as the horrifying truth was revealed not only to the nation of Japan of what the man had done not only to his eldest but to his family too while the PLF war was still going on. But the fiery man himself and his youngest son Shoto learned that the man before them, Dabi, was actually the long thought to be dead elder son Tuya, who because of Endeavor became a villain in the most horrifying way possible. So many had suffered in general, not just civilians but everybody else too, especially the heroes and heroes in training. Especially poor All Might / Toshinori Yagi and Izuku. It was all just mortifying through and through. Blatantly ignoring other people seeing her state, and 𝗵𝗲, upon sensing her heartbreak and sorrow, trying to comfort her with kisses as she just ran faster, hastily wiping the tears away from her as a new look of determination showed forth, even with some tears still lingering in her eyes. I won't let the past repeat itself. I won't let that future come to pass. Even though I've handed the future into the hands of others more capable than me, I'll still do everything I can to help everyone. I won't let anybody else die. I won't let any more people suffer. I just won't let it. As long as I still draw breath, I'll do what I can to help make the future a brighter and better one for everyone. Even if I'm a coward, even if I'm scared, even though I feel like I want to crawl into a hole and never come out again, I won't let this fear rule my life nor run away from everything to the point of letting others bear the consequences of it. I'll do everything I can to save everyone, no matter what it may cost me. Poca vehemently vowed as her nodded to herself and to her partner as she made her way to the door that led to where the buses would be, wiping the last of her tears away so no one else would see them. There she spotted Izuku and Ken, the dragonfly she had met and promised to meet up with again, who was sitting on top of the boy's hair, as he hadn't noticed yet, as she made her way over to them, ready to take on the practicals with all her might. I don't know who's the worst bundle of nerves here, myself or Izuku. Poca thought as she and the greenette sat in the back of the bus as it was taking them and the others to their designated area. It still felt very surreal, but at the same time she knew that it really was happening. I think it's safe to say that both of you are equally as nervous as the other, Ken told her as he sat on top of her head while 𝗵𝗲 was sitting quietly in her lap. Good point. She agreed with the logic. Nervous? She asked the boy next to her as the hero nerd, now in his iconic turquoise tracksuit, could only nod, briefly glad he didn't flinch this time, as he turned to her and asked, "How about you?" "About as nervous as ever," she told him, sympathizing with him as she petted her pup for comfort. Then again, it's pretty understandable. UA is a very well-known school and has a very low acceptance rate. This place is practically the stuff of legend, especially as All Might himself graduated from here, so of course doing well on the exams it's going to leave somebody nervous. He nodded at that. Whether UA or any other top-ranking hero school, anyone was going to get nervous one way or another. Even those he had seen showing confidence were actually hiding their own nerves underneath the masks. Well, except Kaken, he's never nervous about these kinds of things. He has the confidence and the determination to prove it. And it was not for show or because of an ego, well, not entirely anyways. It was through hard work and dedication to become a hero. Even though he bullied him his whole life after having been diagnosed by the doctor years ago. Even though his awful attitude was anything but heroic. Getting the hint that he was about to spiral into dark territory, she pondered for a moment before an idea hit her from a story she had heard from one of her elder foster siblings, flashback, Day 03, so she decided to go for it and say, "But we shouldn't worry." This caught his attention as the boy turned to the girl. Before he could ask her what she meant, she continued, "We can't let our nervousness get the better of us. Even heroes get nervous now and then, but they don't let that stop them from doing what they do." Pumping her fists, she said with more encouraging determination, "We just gotta do our best on the test. Don't worry about the grade. Just be the best heroes we can be, 'cause that's what's most important, and if we fail, if that's not good enough on that F, no matter what anybody may say, show everyone what we've got. Give it our absolute all from the strength of our hearts." Ken nodded firm at that as 𝗵𝗲 nodded as he barked encouragingly. Saying those words alone reminded her of the times she had her own shortcomings, but she never stopped moving forward, even when times were difficult. She herself started to feel better after having said it, especially with much encouragement that she was pouring to the boy who needed it the most. Even if she was nervous and worried about her own progress on the test, she won't worry. She won't let that stop her. Even if she would have to improvise on the fly for the most part and fight through her own worries to persevere. Izuku's eyes glimmered as he felt inspired by that. And he could see that in her eyes she felt better saying that out loud as the tension from her shoulders finally left her, making the fire in her eyes more sincere. In her eyes, though, he could tell that she still had some worry within her, but she was determined to shake it off if it meant encouraging him, giving him the boost that he was lacking. She was in the same boat as him, but what she said made sense once more. Izuku slowly nodded, took a deep breath and gave her a timid but determined smile and replied, "All right." She smiled back, seeing the fire burn in his eyes as she had hoped she would see, relieved as she nodded in return. A thought seemed to strike her as she then told him, as if already knowing what he was going to ask her when it had occurred to him, as the former is an American thing. Okay, that made more sense there. He thought to himself as he nodded as she softly gestured a fist bump, to which he smiled, a little more relaxed this time, appreciating the gentle approach as he returned it. "That's so manly," exclaimed a voice in front of them as they were both startled and turned to a boy with spiky shaggy black hair that was down and bright red eyes, light medium tan skin, flashing them a smile as his teeth literally looked about as sharp and jagged as a shark's, pumping his own fist as he felt inspired from their display. "Ijiro Kirishima." Poca recognized right away as this surprised her. She didn't think that this boy, before he dyed his hair red, happened to be in the same area as Izuku, and now her. What were the odds? And for the life of her, she can't recall if there were any hints of which area he had been in during the exam. Still, this actually allowed her to see him in the clothes he had been wearing during the test, as she only got a brief glimpse of it during his flashback in Season 4. A dark red high-collar button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up until they were above the elbows, the shirt alone being almost as dark as his pants, which were a solid black, and he was wearing the same black shoes that he wore during the swimming pool episode in Season 3. The look made him look pretty handsome, she will admit. Not that she was looking for romance. He would still make a great boyfriend from his good-hearted personality alone. And it wasn't just him who they had gained attention from. Sitting next to him was, to their further surprise, none other than 𝗬𝗓𝐻 herself, as she too had turned to them from within her seat as she pumped her fist. "Yeah, I feel fired up," the 𝐔𝐬𝐽 user exclaimed, feeling inspired herself after having heard what she and the boy next to her had heard. To their growing surprise and flustered-up embarrassment, it seems that everyone on the bus had heard them, more particularly from Poca herself, as now everybody was chatting about it, giving their own cheers and shouting thanks, to which it made the two blush about as red as rubies as they both comedically covered their faces, their whines muffled as 𝗵𝗲 simply barked at them as if trying to get them to cheer up, while Ken does the same, but without the barking, as he flew from one head to another between them. That was when the two in front of them noticed the pup. "No way you got a Pomeranian!" Ijiro exclaimed in odd surprise, while 𝗬𝗓𝐻 squealed in excitement. "It's so cute." This made the dog turn to them as he happily barked before popping out of his owner's lap and right in front of them, startling them, as 𝗬𝗓𝐻 was the first to catch him as he started licking her, causing her to giggle as Ijiro affectionately petted him as he turned to him to start licking his hand and turned back to look at the girl and vice versa. "Who's a good boy?" "You are." "Yes, you are." "Yes, you are." Ijiro cooed as the display in front of them was what finally got the two to lower their hands as their blush faded as they started to chuckle at this. Although they felt like covering their faces again when they realized that this display caught everybody's attention, as they were now gossiping about how cute the Pomeranian was, even getting pictures of the pup too. "His name is 𝗵𝗲. Poca told them after having taken a deep breath to calm down. "As you already witnessed, his quirk lets him pop in from one point to another. He's going to be my future AHP. She then turned to the chocolate brunette as she told her, "He was with me when we met you at the entrance. I can't believe you didn't notice." I was a little surprised when she didn't start fawning over him the first moment we met. Maybe she was just nervous enough to not notice him or do so, Poca thought to herself. "And I feel ashamed for not seeing him right away," the girl currently being snuggled by the pup replied, He's way too cute to not notice. Poca giggled as Izuku eventually took a deep breath to calm down completely. All the while, the girl herself felt ashamed for drawing attention onto him unintentionally, as she was the one that got everyone riled up. And he's really good at comforting people when they feel nervous. Izuku added softly as the dog eventually popped over to him as he started to snuggle him too, as if to emphasize his claim. The greenette hugged him softly as the black-haired boy replied, "That's awesome. It's not every day you get to see a hero who has an AHP with them, so meeting a potential participant who has one is even more awesome." "I agree," 𝗧𝗪𝗄 replied. "I can only imagine," Poca said. In her mind, she knew that from what she remembered from the show and manga, there wasn't any AHPs, at least not any she was aware of, so this was either a completely new concept in terms of this universe being a tad different from what she knew by heart, or the subject in its own right was so rare that they can only be found outside of Japan. Or anyone who actually does have an AHP lives very far from Mizutofu or something. The only quirked animals she knew of were the principal himself and that one cat from the Vigilantes Volume 3 manga. She will have to do more research later. By the way, the hardening user said, curiosity visible on his face. "What's the story with the dragonfly on your head?" To put it simply, a part of my quirk lets me communicate with insects. She explained as she looked up to meet the dragonfly's gaze as he looked down at her. "This little guy here is Ken. He's been helping me in navigating around here as I just moved here quite unexpectedly from America not too long ago." "You're from there?" Izuku asked, surprised and curious himself as she now had his and the others' full attention. "That seems pretty unbelievable given how perfect your Japanese is." "Yep, I'm getting myself a big cake later to celebrate me helping him to be more open enough to talk with others without stuttering. I know there will still be some work to do, but this will definitely help him in the long run." Internally, she cheered at her accomplishment as she answered, smiling with joy, "That's because I've been studying how to communicate in Japanese and understand the language for years. Mainly starting from the first time I saw an anime that was produced in Japan before it was dubbed into English when I was a kid. It got me interested, so I dove in and started learning. Sometimes back home, I even spoke to myself in Japanese when I didn't want anybody to know what I was saying in private." "That's pretty neat," 𝗧𝗪𝗄 exclaimed. "Yup, and now I'm finally getting to put it to good use given that I'll be living in Japan for the foreseeable future," Poca told her, though in her mind she thought worriedly, "There's no telling if this is permanent, or if I will someday be sent back home. Not that there will be anybody waiting for me there aside from my current guardians, and what few friends I managed to hang on to over the years." Not wanting to show her own worry, she then told them, "A part of my quirk also lets me translate any language out there no matter what kind. This really comes in handy in case something comes up, like in case I end up in a foreign country out of nowhere, or if I somehow get amnesia and can't remember the language I worked so hard to learn or something." "That's so cool and super useful," Izuku exclaimed as his eyes sparkled with excitement, already seeing the gears turn in his head as Poca fought hard to not laugh at his reaction, as it was just too endearing to resist, but she had to for his sake. "I agree," chimed Daijiro. "Having a quirk like that can really help in situations like that, or if you meet somebody who doesn't speak Japanese or English. And be helpful if the language you are confronted with is one you've never spoken before and yet, boom, you instantly understand and know how to speak that language without a problem," 𝗧𝗪𝗄 added. Before anything else could be done or said, the noise of the bus stopping had signaled to everybody that they had arrived at their destination as one by one everybody filed out of the big white vehicle, chatting to each other all the while for some as the group of four got off last. This time, Hamataro was riding on Izuku's shoulder, but on the opposite shoulder to the one he usually perches himself on with his owner. "What's America like over there?" 𝗧𝗪𝗄 asked her, now curious to know as she folded her arms behind her head. "It's quite different from here in Japan, even though I've only been here for a short while," Poca answered honestly, or at least as she simply could as she thought, "far more different than you could ever realize, and I've only been here to this Japan for like literally hours." Back to the conversation she continued, "I haven't really had a chance to explore this country, so I don't really know what else it has in store besides what I can only imagine and have read about in the past. If you're from the USA, then I got to know, who's your favorite American hero?" Daijiro asked, anxious yet excited with curiosity. "Star and Stripe," she replied. "She's totally cool, and she's practically All Might's twin sister in a sense." That, and she's the only American pro hero I can think of at the top of my head besides 𝐒𝐬𝐽 and Godzilla. Pressure's a pain in the butt, but I am being sincere. Poca thought in her mind. I'm glad I took the time to look up more info on her on Wikipedia a little while back. Indeed, mistress. Ken agreed. I know, right? And it's not just because she's the #1 hero there. Izuku chimed in excitedly. There was even an interview a while back where she explained that during his time in America, he was the one who actually saved her and her family when she was a child from a villain attack, and since then had inspired her to become a pro hero in the first place. Really? 𝗧𝗪𝐻 exclaimed. That's so awesome. And super manly too. Exclaimed Ijiro, looking pumped up. Poca lightly giggled as she nodded along. She then turned to the gates, only for her eyes to widen as she practically felt her jaw drop, because wow, that gate is ginormous. She whistled, getting the others' attention as she pointed to the gate. That's definitely the biggest gate I've ever seen in my whole life. I'm inclined to agree. Ken said in awe while 𝗵𝗃𝗲 lightly barked in agreement and fascination. Whoa, no joke. Ijiro exclaimed in surprise, eyes widened. Are they expecting us to fight giants or something? Hopefully not. Poca said weakly. Technically it wasn't a lie. Sure, there was one giant opponent in the midst of everything, but thankfully it's only just one in each testing area. Oh, now I'm getting nervous again just thinking about it. 𝗧𝗪𝐻 said with a bit of dread, nervous once more. At that response, 𝗵𝗃𝗲 popped over to 𝗧𝗪𝐻 as he was now perched on her right shoulder as he started to lick her gently yet affectionately, nuzzling against her face, getting her attention as she, at first startled but then, instantly calmed down and petted him in return. She sighed a sigh that she felt like she had been holding in for longer than mere moments, smiling as she said, thanks. 𝗵𝗏𝗀. He lightly roughed before popping over to Ijiro, giving gently kisses too, before doing the same for Izuku and back to Poca. Thanks, 𝗵, she told him smiling. Good job. Soon producing a treat from out of her pocket and giving it to the pup, which he sniffed before happily accepting it, munching with joy. 𝗵𝗃𝗲's mere presence and calm demeanor in times of stress, nerves and worry are what she hoped he would exhibit for when it came to those who were distressed and panicked, both in active rescue operations and in the aftermath of everything. His empathy, gentleness, kind gestures, and appearance alone is enough to calm anyone down. Either he's more emotionally smart or the people at the pet shop did a great job raising him to be so, or both. Either way, 𝗵𝗃𝗲 is definitely getting extra treats later, and I'm going to be sending a nice gift to the staff for their care and kindness for him. Poca thought to herself, before she thought the last bit in bitter mischievousness, and send a little quote-unquote surprise for the guy that wanted to get rid of the poor pup. Hope you enjoy talking with Animal Protective Services. I needed that, thanks little pup. Ijiro replied while Izuku nodded, both smiling lightly from that. The pup lightly barked again, in his own dog language saying, "You're welcome," as he received a petting from his owner, to which he instinctually leaned into it. The huge gates are most likely for participants and students who have the ability to make themselves bigger, maybe to the size of a giant, hence why they're so gigantic, and for getting the robot enemies inside the fake city without issues. Poca theorized, turned back to the gate as she spoke, in her mind somehow having a feeling that it had something to do with Mount Lady, though whether or not she actually attended UA or a different hero school before becoming a pro was still a mystery to her, although she wouldn't be surprised if the staff from UA had caught wind of someone like her with her quirk and what difficulties it came with, and thus made the necessary precautions in case anything happened, and if it wasn't and they'd always been there in case an instance like that did come about or something, or it's because of the fact that they use giant robots for their tests and such from the start. Again, it's still a mystery. That makes sense. Both Ijiro and 𝗧𝗪𝐻 said in unison, scratching your chins in thought. I agree. I can concur with that deduction. The gang turned to the voice, who just so happened to be Tenya, whom Poca couldn't help but give the stink eye to as he approached the group. 𝗵𝗃𝗲, upon sensing his owner's mood, growled under his breath at him, giving him a warning that if he did or said anything bad then there won't be mercy. The Bluenet tried to ignore the two, keyword tried, given what happened earlier at the orientation hall, as he then said, I expect no less from a prestigious school such as UA to do such a thing to make things convenient for them and their future wards. You're the kid that got called out after trying to call out someone else. 𝗧𝗪𝐻 pointed out, recognizing him instantly. The boy flinched at that before he admitted, yes. Well, that wasn't my proudest moment. Yeah, what you pulled back there wasn't manly, dude. The hardening boy told him, crossing his arms as a disappointed frown was present on his face. The blue-haired boy could only nod before he bowed and said, "I apologize for my tomfoolery back there. It was extremely unbecoming of a future participant hoping to get into a prestigious hero school such as this." But Izuku, who was still nervous after what happened back at the hall because of this boy, timidly asked, "Who are you apologizing to exactly?" The blue boy in question looked up to see him, feeling a wave of guilt upon seeing the look on his face, and honestly he could not blame him. He had been very unfair to him even though he hadn't done anything wrong. The light-haired brunette from before did have a point, because this boy wasn't the only one who was talking but she and another boy too, same with everyone else around him, and yet he had the audacity to pin all the blame on him out of being nervous himself, even though it was unwarranted, unconstructive, and most notably selfish. She was protecting her friend, so she had every right to snap at him like that. Speaking of whom, he then turned to face her as he couldn't help but flinch again upon seeing the stink eye she was giving him and seeing her pup growl at him. Of course he can't blame either of them for still being miffed with him. Upon registering the green-haired boy's question, that was when it hit him as he felt like face-palming himself out of his own blindness. He never apologized to either of them, especially the boy, even though he had apologized to 𝗵𝘃𝗵𝗲. He hung his head shamefully as he answered his question, "To you and your friend, actually. I let my own nerves get the better of me, and I end up blaming you for something that wasn't exactly a cause for concern. Everyone else around me was talking, not just you and your friends, and yet I picked on you without meaning to. I made myself look like a bully because of it, and almost made you even more nervous than you already were and even garner unwanted attention on yourself. And yes, I will admit that I was about to lecture your friend about her having a dog with her if she hadn't stopped me like she did." Poca, exhaling to calm down from that, grateful that he wasn't there to lecture them for talking again and was actually apologizing for his actions, unlike some people she knew, then said, "I faced bullies in the past before, so I don't tolerate bullying at all, especially if it's towards others who I care about. I understand that you were nervous, but it was still very inconsiderate of you to react the way that you did, especially acting like all of it was Izuku's fault even though it wasn't. And I understand that you take rules and manners seriously, but it doesn't change the fact that the way you acted back there made you look like you're an obsessive-compulsive nitpicking bully. And it was very unbecoming of me in that regard." He agreed, even though it hurt she was still right about that. "I promise I'll learn from this blunder so that I won't repeat it in the future. As a hopeful hero in training, the last thing I want is to make others uncomfortable or weary around me for snapping at anyone for the tiniest trivial things. So I do hope you two can forgive me for my foolishness." Now much calmer than before, and her dog companion calmed himself as he finally stopped growling upon sensing her relaxing. She turned to Izuku as he turned to her, giving him a relaxed smile as he gave one back in return as his nervousness finally faded, both nodding to each other as they turned back to the boy. He had a good heart, he just made some mistakes, and he was asking for forgiveness, so he was a good person. "Of course," Poca responded first. "Holding a grudge towards someone is just a waste of time and leads to nothing but trouble, no matter what the reason." "She's right," Izuku said next. "Besides, you're apologizing to us now and you acknowledge that you did something wrong. You never meant any harm, so let's just forgive and forget, okay?" "Of course." The brunette agreed as he stood back up, posture straight as he remained standfast, "And I shall endeavor not to disappoint you both by backtracking." Everyone smiled as they nodded at that, with Kirishima flashing a toothy smile as he was glad things were resolved, while Achicho smiled as she sighed in relief at there being no further issues here. Before any one of them could say or do anything more, an alarm went off as everybody's attention was drawn to the voice of 𝗵𝘃𝗵𝗲, who stood on top of a high tower as he announced, "All right, let's start." Many were confused by what he meant, but only Poca knew as, without hesitation, she grabbed the brunette's wrist and started running towards the gates which had started to open, practically dragging him as he soon, though haphazardly, followed suit, very startled but confused as he was about to ask her what she was doing. But very soon his question was answered as he heard the voice hero tell them all, "Get moving. There are no countdowns in real battles. Those two already got the memo. Run, 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 listeners. You're wasting airtime here." Almost immediately after that, the boy saw everybody else start moving as they headed towards the gate as they were, Although thanks to the light brunette, the two had already gotten a head start, with the engine boy following closely behind thanks to his quirk, as it was inevitable that he would eventually outrun them, followed by 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐽 and 𝐒𝐿𝐼𝐽 as they ran with all their might to catch up. Now getting his footing as he was following in stride, Izuku and Poca ran as they started to look for any enemies they could engage with. "Remember what I told you?" Poca told him as the boy nodded as he soon activated his quirk, going up to 3% as he started to catch up to her stride, almost outrunning her as, knowing he got it, she let go of his hand before using both to hold them wide in the air, attracting the water from the others around who were already sweating, as she was able to sense this earlier, filing away the new fact of being able to sense any water within her proximity for later, before pulling her hands to her, hands closing into fists as the sweat droplets were pulled over to her, surprising some of the participants in the process, though thankfully not enough to stop them from their goals. "Here goes nothing," Poca thought as she leapt into the air. Within that moment, all the sweat gathered under her command soon gathered around the bottoms of her shoes, near instantly forming into ice before she put her legs down and posed as if she were riding a skateboard, which she only had bearable skills on, and as she hoped, she was soon hovering in the air. With this, their pacing now matches the other as they kept moving without stopping. Izuku was stunned at this display as Poca told him, "Since I can make water float and move along with anything involving water, including ice, I thought it would be a handy idea to use it as a way to help me glide or even fly, not only ensuring that I don't overexert my physical limits, but it also helps me to get to places faster." "That's genius," Izuku exclaimed in astonishment. "I know, right?" Poca agreed, before admitting sheepishly with a nervous smile, "Though truth be told, this is my first time testing this theory into action. It was a risky gamble, even though I'm glad that I was proven right. I haven't had my quirk very long either, so there's still some parts of it that I do not know about. And while I do have a good handle on quirk analysis, it wouldn't hurt to have a second opinion. Although I really don't know who I can ask without coming off as desperate, and I'm not even sure how much normal quirk counseling costs." This thoroughly surprised the boy as he had assumed that she had had it all her life. He didn't think that she was a late bloomer, probably later than most from judging by what she just said, meaning that she spent most of her life as a quirkless kid too. Still, for being a newbie and using a quirk, she seemed to be an expert. Then again, it was probably because of her years of understanding quirks and how they tick. So that might be how she got a good handle on it. But still, he could see her predicament, because he needed her help to get a handle on his quirk before the actual exams began after the written exam. Despite him having years of studying quirks under his belt, there's a difference between understanding how someone else's quirk works and how your own quirk works. And given that she said that she only just moved here to Japan recently, it would be difficult for her or even her family to find help right away on how her quirk worked entirely beyond what she got a handle on so far, and that's just one thing that had to be tackled among getting other things done and all the paperwork finished, immigration, confirming new residency and such. As par for the course when it comes to families moving from one country to another, let alone even one person doing so, especially if it's between America and Japan. All in all, it's going to be chaotic, time-consuming, and strenuous. Maybe. The boy thought to himself before he came to the answer to her problem, one of which he would one day learn would change his life forever. "Then maybe I can help you with that," Izuku offered, understanding her plight and taking the chance to offer her assistance. Since she helped him earlier after the written exams, it was the very least he could do for her, for all she has done for him in the short amount of time they've known each other. "Why, really?" Poca herself was surprised by his offer, so much so that she almost lost balance and fell over, but thankfully was able to catch herself and continue gliding in midair. Although she had a feeling that he would help her, she hoped he would. She didn't think that it would be this fast. She was honestly expecting for much later. "Why, yeah," he replied, somewhat stuttering, but only because he was still getting used to running with his quirk activated as he stumbled a bit before catching himself immediately. "You helped me with my quirk and you stood up for me several times today. It's the very least I can do. Besides, we could benefit from the other. Since we're both good at quirk analysis, we might be able to bounce off each other's ideas, thoughts, theories, and even find new creative ways in using our quirks, one way or another." This warmed her heart as she felt equal parts touched and relieved at this. With his help, it would be one less thing for her to worry about as she gets settled into her new home. And as an added bonus, she could keep him company and help him to develop his social skills before the next school year starts. It was a win-win for them both. Not to mention that loneliness stinks. Even if you might have insect or animal companions, not having any human companions can make things lonely too. She nodded as she told him, "I would really appreciate it, thank you." Before either of them could say another word, right in front of them a side wall exploded as a one-pointer robot appeared before them. This made them both jump, but Poca quickly stomped her own fear down as she mentally shouted to Izuku and to herself, "Don't be scared. Let's do it." That snapped him out of it as the expression on his face went from frightened to determined as he leapt at the robot, sailing through the air as he pulled back his right fist, jumping from 3% to 5% before throwing it forward as he yelled, "Smash." Upon contact with the robot, he literally knocked its block off as the head unit went flying, and immediately after that the rest of the one-pointer just shut down. He landed as he felt a wave of disbelief yet a sense of accomplishment course through him as he realized that he did it. He actually used the quirk that his mentor gave him. He was able to defeat the one-pointer. "Nice shot, Izuku." Poca called back to him as he turned to her, who was commanding a horde of bees, which greatly surprised him as he wondered when she had summoned the bees, let alone had time to do so, as she sent them swarming towards another one-pointer that came their way, disorienting and confusing a robot as some of them to get inside it, chipping away at its circuitry and wiring inside. More particularly the most important parts that kept the thing functioning, until it shut down completely. All this done in a matter of seconds, which was astounding and practically unheard of for the Greenette. "Whoa!" Izuku exclaimed in astonishment. "Great job."
"Thanks."
She called out, "Let's keep going."
"Right."
The Greenette agreed. The two split off as they went off to find more robots to fight, even find any examinees that may need help too. Earlier when they were getting on the bus before they arrived at their exam area, they briefly talked about them working together while at the same time splitting off every now and then to gather points and help out anyone that might need a helping hand. Showing that they were capable of both working on their own and working together with others, as heroism wasn't just about fighting by yourself, it's also about working with your partners, whether you were familiar with them or not, to get the job done and leading them hand as they will have your back in return. As much as she was still concerned about her new friend, she nonetheless had to trust that he would be fine and take her words to heart. She knew he could do it, she knows he will. She wasn't always going to be there, and the last thing she wanted was to coddle or baby him. No, he needed to grow and get stronger on his own. Nodding to herself as she sped ahead, soon calling out upon spotting two-pointers ahead of her, "Look out, robots, 'cause here we come." Meanwhile, in a dark observation room, which was lit up by practically a million screens showing various participants in the exams in all areas, sat all, except the voice hero himself and the dog hero Hound Dog, the staff members of UA, including the principal and their soon-to-be new staff member, Toshinori Yagi, better known as All Might, as they all sat and observed each and every participant that the monitors were showing. Clearly, the examinees have no idea how many villains are present or in their location. They have limited time, must cover a vast area, and hunt down every last target. Nizu stated as he was sipping his usual cup of tea, as everyone expected of him, although what was odd this time around was the fact that he had what appeared to be a big overstuffed envelope that seems to be full of something right by his side. What contents were in it they had no clue, except for the fact that their fellow co-worker Nomuri found it stuffed inside of an air vent in one of the stalls in the girls' changing room as she'd been pointed to it by a fellow examinee. The woman was still baffled by this, but trusted the principal to examine the contents and figure out what was inside, even if they didn't have a clue of who had stuffed it inside of there, as there were many girls in the changing room and a handful had used that particular stall to change privately. It could have been any one of them as far as they knew, considering the fact that the envelope in question looked very new and couldn't have been in there for no more than a minute or two. Nomuri herself did, however, know that the principal had opened it and found a letter, which was several pages long, inside which he had read what the contents of the letter were. She had no clue, and it was really hard to tell what the principal was thinking given the fact that he had his usual poker face on, although by the look in his eyes she could tell that he was thinking about 1,000,000 miles a minute. But of what? Again, she had no clue. As soon as he finished reading the letter, given the fact that he was very quick about it thanks to his quirk, he had stuffed the letter into his inner vest pocket after folding it up and closed the envelope up, intending to look at the other contents inside of it later as he gestured for them both to get to the observation room as the physical exam was about to start. Upon being asked The hybrid simply told her that he would tell her, and the others later once he had time to examine the rest of the items inside, specifically after the exams were over. It won't be hard for him to do, so given the fact that despite everything else that will most certainly come about once the exams were over, he was more than capable of multitasking without a problem. Some use information gathering abilities to form out strategies, while some use speed to pull ahead of their peers. Of course, remaining calm under pressure can give one a huge advantage, as can pure power and combat ability. The hybrid said as he pointed out to each specific participant that matched each of his statements, first being a tall boy wearing a mask who had an octopus-like quirk, the second was recognizably the youngest son of the 𝐈𝐧𝐿 agency, the third was a flamboyant blonde boy who had a laser quirk around his belly button which seemed to be focused carefully thanks to the belt around his waist, and the fourth person was a spiky-haired platinum blonde who had an explosion-type quirk. He concluded, the most successful students use a combination of all these tactics. They are the ones who rack up the highest scores. I'd say this year's group looks promising. Namuri gave her 2 cents. Not to mention interesting. Powerloader stated as he pointed to a screen that had caught his attention, which showed none other than Poca herself as she was healing a fellow examinee, who had burn marks but they were quickly fading under the light pink glow, with her quirk via physical contact while her pup was comforting another examine who not only showed a look of gratitude, but also was absolutely adoring the little puppy. It's not every day you encounter somebody who has a healing-type quirk, and a strong one by the looks of it. Snipe chimed in, not going to doubt for a sec that RG's going to take the girl under her wing and make her her apprentice. Although I'm curious as to why she seems to have a dragonfly constantly by her side, I'm more than intrigued that she has a dog with a quirk with her. It's not something you see every day, especially as any hero who has an AHP is kind of rare. Wait, wasn't that kid flying earlier? Asked 𝗂𝗃𝗃, confused. Don't you mean commanding a swarm of bees and roaches? I saw her totally command swarms of them to attack some of the bots and blind them. Freaked out a few examinees but was able to calm them down with the puppy. Vlad King interjected. You both got it wrong. She was manipulating water, turned it into ice after gathering it all from the literal sweat of her fellow examinees and skewered a few of the 2-pointers like they were made of paper mache. 13 disagreed. I thought it was super reflexes or agility. I saw her parkour and backflip around a few of the robots to distract them to help a fellow participant get some points. Namuri said, now just as confused as everybody else. Not sure who was right nor of what was going on as she then added as she held her chin in deep confusion. But then, I'm not joking when I tell you guys that a moment ago I saw her put up a shield of energy to protect herself and another participant from getting ran over by another bot. But for a sec I thought I was seeing things and assumed that it was just her ice that she was using as a shield. Okay, what on earth is going on? Vlad King exclaimed now in exasperated frustration, pretty much voicing what everybody else was going to either say or was already thinking of. To answer all of your questions in one answer, it was actually all the above. Nizu cut in, garnering everyone's attention as they turned to him, shocked and even more confused than ever. Everyone, especially the #1 hero who had violently coughed up blood at that moment as a surge of fear coursed through him, exclaimed in sheer disbelief. In fact, I actually ran into the girl when everybody was getting registered at the entrance. She was one of the few late participants coming in. She was very distraught and worried. Thankfully, I was able to help quail it and entertain her puppy while she filled out the registration forms. He told them as he pulled out said forms out of his other inner vest pocket, unfolding it as he went through the contents again as he continued. Her quirk is called Swiss Army Knife, or also known as multi-tool, and much like the item itself, her quirk has multiple tools to it, some of which can be combined to aid her when needed. Each quirk-like aspect is unique and makes the user as a whole unpredictable to her opponent who would not think she had more than one aspect of her quirk. Stopping briefly to take a sip of his tea, Nizu then continued, to give you a brief summary of what she can do. She has the power to translate any language flawlessly no matter what kind it may be. She can manipulate water in any way, shape and perform but cannot produce it herself. She can communicate and control insects whether verbally or telepathically. She has the ability to adapt to whatever is going on in her environment, from giving her temporary physical boosts to helping her to learn things more quickly than others could, to even combining it with her other quirks to achieve new abilities and feats, from detecting things in her environment to seeing into a person's memories, to name a few. She is a living lie detector, so she can tell if anybody is lying or telling the truth to her, and unlike most people, she does in fact have the power to turn it on and off when needed. She can heal any injury no matter how grave it is, yet it has yet to be determined just how far her limits can go in that regard. And lastly, the last of her power is a wild card, as it can allow her to achieve many things if she has any hope within her and depending on the situation at hand, and it especially becomes more prominent if she mixes it adaptation and detector with it, possibly even the other aspects of her quirk if she knows how to apply it right. Snipe whistled, both baffled and shocked at the same time. Talk about a jack of all trades. Is it really possible for someone to develop a quirk with multiple aspects to it? Vlad King asked, rather skeptical at this. A case like that would be extremely rare. It has happened a few times before, but even then those occurrences have happened few and far in between, about as wide as the United States itself. Nizu answered, still calm despite the others still being shocked and suspicious about this revelation. According to what she wrote, her quirk only just came in recently, and the reason why no one knew about it is because it was to protect her from any who may try to do her harm because of her quirk or even kidnap her. That makes sense, Powerloader chimed in, scratching his chin all the while. With a unique powerhouse like that, it makes sense to keep it on the hush-hush in order to make sure that no one with malicious intent would try and swoop in to kidnap her, and even use her for malevolent misdeeds. Or even sell her to make a big fat profit. Or worse, the government could try recruiting her to become an assassin. A person with a quirk is unpredictable, as this would be impossible to track down and could cause some serious unease to arise, and that's just putting it mildly, since I don't need to say it out loud just how terrifying it could become. Ectoplasm pointed out, or worse still, recruit her to become a villain. That would be a new nightmare for the heroes to face. During my brief interaction with her, I could tell that she is the type to easily become fearful, stressed, and worried. But I could see the fire in her eyes that told me that she wanted to do good despite her emotional flaws, and from what I saw, she seems to be rather clumsy. She even wrote in her resume that she's planning to go underground, as she's not someone to be a spotlight hero, and it would work more with her quirk and preference in that regard. Nizu told them, which would be a wise move on her part. With time and training, I'm sure she can become one of the best underground heroes out there. The fact that she even acknowledges her own shortcomings but is willing to work hard only shows how serious she is in wanting to improve and help people. This really caught Eraserhead's attention, better known as 𝗧𝗪𝐻, as he listened with intrigue and concern. Toshinori, meanwhile, on the other hand, had a surge of emotions spiraling wildly inside him like a tornado, from fear to suspicion to anger to apprehension and more. This had all for one's name written all over it. It just seemed way too suspicious to him. But this couldn't be possible, he thought to himself. He crushed his head like a literal bloody egg in return for that monster piercing his ribcage and organs, which had almost cost him his life. There's no way he could have survived from the injuries he had inflicted on him, as what the hero himself did to him was way worse than that which his arch-enemy had inflicted on him almost 6 years ago. Unless he had some kind of backup plan before his demise, or somehow he escaped with his life. Although, even if that were true, he didn't think that the man himself would be able to live long enough without any help from others around him, especially one who had to be an extremely well-experienced doctor that could tackle even such grievous injuries like that which that heartless villain had received back then. We never did find the body after I fainted from blood loss and was taken to the hospital immediately afterwards, he thought to himself as his thoughts went back to what had happened a few short hours ago at the beach. That same girl he had caught, that same girl that was taking the physical exam with everyone else. She came flying out of the portal that appeared out of nowhere almost immediately after young Midoriya was out of sight after leaving him to head home to get prepared for the exams. Said portal closed immediately after she came out, and had he not caught her, she would have most likely had gotten hurt. The girl. Upon briefly looking at the papers that the principal still had in his hands, he was able to catch what her name was. Pocahontas 𝗧𝗪𝗡. A very unusual name indeed. He's heard of many names in the past, including that which he heard during his time in America, but this was definitely the most odd and unique-sounding name he'd ever heard of. When the girl had looked up to him to thank him after helping her to reorient herself, she seemed quite shocked, but not the kind of shock he was expecting of somebody who had never met him but had heard of him until that point. No, this kind of shock was very different. Beyond disbelief, a more extreme case of it. More like the kind of shock that a character from an isekai anime would express, especially if it was something relating to that which they already had knowledge of but never knew was an actual real thing. It looked like she had wanted to scream, but didn't, in favor of asking him where her location was, albeit in a very stiff manner that showed the telltale signs of her trying to not freak out but was very close to exploding from it. After that she just bolted, but not without him seeing her pale even worse than she already was and looking very close to fainting from shock, maybe even fear or scream so loud that it would make 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝐵 look like a mere noisemaker. During all of that there was no sign of a dragonfly or a dog right by her side, which only added more to his own suspicion. He had no way to know just who this girl was or what her purpose was, and whether or not she was genuinely just a hopeful hero participant or an agent of AFO, he just did not know. Upon getting a look from the principal, he knew right away that there was a hidden message in that stare he was giving him, meaning that after the practicals were over the two would come to his office and discuss matters privately. Until then he wisely chose to keep his mouth shut, taking a few deep breaths to calm himself despite the still present apprehension and suspicion that still lingers within his chest. There was a time and place for everything, but for now as he wiped the blood from his mouth with his handkerchief he would have to wait. Intending to look into the matter later, as Powerloader decided that now is the time to unleash the finale opponent that the examiners were about to face. I think that's 40 bots. But I don't know how many hero points I have, Poca said to herself as she took a moment to catch her breath. She knew that this exam was going to be tough, she just didn't know how. She still had enough energy to keep going, but that didn't change the fact that she was still out of breath. Just because she can revitalize her own energy with her healing quirk, it doesn't change the fact that she still felt some fatigue and some of her stamina draining. It was only thanks to her flying with her water that she was able to conserve as much energy as she had, otherwise she would be way more winded and probably be on the verge of collapsing. She used not just one, but every quirk she had in her arsenal however she could. From using the sweat from others to use as a means of flight and piercing attacks, to call on any bugs that Ken told her were nearby to aid in either literally eating the insides of the robot to deactivate them or to simply blind them, so she could save other participants who were either outmatched or at a severe disadvantage, or even to protect them from getting harmed. To sensing her surroundings around her so that not only does she avoid accidentally crashing into anything or anyone, but also she would know if there were any enemies or other participants nearby, to healing anybody that had been injured, as long as their injuries were above minor bruising and cuts which would heal over time, to obtaining temporary physical boosts like speed, strength, flexibility, agility, durability, and strength, especially in the legs, to achieve leaps and bounds, literally. To being able to tell if someone was lying to her about their apparent physical states, which only happened a few times. To talking with other participants who were actually not from Japan and were still having trouble trying to learn how to speak Japanese completely, having a quirk that makes you multilingual can really help, especially in overcoming a language barrier straight off the bat. To producing energy shields as not only a means of defense in protecting herself and others, but also as a means of offense when needed, and even for carrying participants away from the danger, to telepathically giving warnings to other participants so that they can avoid serious injury, and more. And she wasn't just doing all that. She had teamed up with a few participants briefly here and there to help them gain extra points along with her, and to show how well they worked with others, familiar and otherwise. Because teamwork makes the dream work after all. She even got to see a few familiar faces during all this, from Mizo Shoji to Yuga Aoyama, whom she was very tempted to just outright confront and try to help him with his family situation, knowing for a fact that they were under threat of AFO, but couldn't for numerous reasons, especially of the clear-cut fact that if that monster caught onto her too soon there was no telling what would happen. Which was why she was grateful that there were hundreds, if not thousands of students inside this area. And therefore she can make it harder for anybody to try and figure out what her true quirk was, especially as she put up her hood and laid down every now and then to keep the confusion up. Still, she has to leave the matters with the naval laser user and his family to the heroes so that they can actually help him and give them the proper protection they need against that cruel-hearted emperor of evil. She ran into Ijiro and Achicho, whom she helped as they helped her in return, from alleviating the zero-gravity user of her impending nausea to healing the hardening user of his injuries and giving them both the energy that was spent in their body so that they could keep going. In return, they protected her when she ended up tripping badly due to her clumsiness and almost got decimated by a 1-pointer and 2 3-pointers, and as promised, she and Izuku worked together every once in a while to gain points and help other participants who needed assistance, from actually saving them from getting taken out by a robot to giving them a valuable advice every now and then that could help them with both their quirks and fighting against robots and someday future villains. She even got saved from getting hit by stray pieces of flying shrapnel by Tenya, who too thankfully avoided getting himself. While she could have easily protected herself, she nonetheless had been distracted for a brief moment, and so was grateful for the engine user's assistance. All in all, as far as she could tell, things were going fine. Although if she was being honest, this was more of a bigger hustle and bustle and chaotic hullabaloo than any time she dealt with any of her younger orphan/foster mates over the years. At least she didn't have to worry about any of these participants fighting against each other, as they were focused on fighting the robots and gaining points. Those heroes in the comics, mangas, shows, and movies make it look so easy. But I know that there are a handful that don't really get it right away, and for others they just had years of practice. Me, on the other hand, I'm still a rookie. Will I ever get used to this? Poca thought to herself as she took one last deep breath before taking to the air again with the frozen sweat she had collected, still attached to the bottom of her shoes in a permafrost state to ensure it wouldn't melt easily. Only the hands of time will reveal that soon enough, mistress. Ken answered her as he came back to her in time to land on her head just before she started flying off. And don't think her puppy has been slacking, nor the dragonfly, far from it. Not only was 𝗵𝗲 giving some assurance to a few of the more frightened participants here and there, he also alerted his owner of any. Later he was already shooting up into the sky, leaving a cracked-up crater where he once stood, adrenaline making it easier to ignore the pain in his 3 toes on both of his feet as he pulled back his right fist, channeling his quirk once more as he readied to smash the 0-pointer's face in. Once he was close enough, he launched his fist forward as he yelled "smash," and like a wall of tin foil the robot's face crumbled up in on itself as if it weren't made out of strong, durable enough material, resembling more like a crumpled-up paper ball than scrunched-up metal, and instantaneously shutting it down as the robot's body stopped moving. For a moment, he felt happy that it worked, and more so that he was able to use his quirk to save the other participants below, and with the results here there would be no flying debris that could potentially hit anyone nearby by accident. But it only lasted for a short instant as gravity soon took hold of him as he quickly realized that he was plummeting back down to the ground. Already his mind was racing in fright and panic as he thought desperately to come up with a solution to stop himself from hitting the ground and either getting badly hurt or meeting an early demise. Examining himself, while his toes were in agonizing pain, he was very aware that the rest of his feet were okay, while his right hand on the other hand definitely looked like it had seen better days, as it was an angry red with some purplish hues here and there as it hurt worse than his toes. He was still able to move it even though he still felt shots of pain coursing through him when he did. What would All Might do? He thought as an idea occurred to him. Whenever his mentor used his quirk, it always generated a lot of wind. So maybe if he channeled enough power, he might be able to cushion his fall by generating enough wind to decrease his descent. Better for the landing to be rough than to be painful in this case, just as long as he didn't land wrong and risk getting another injury. He pulled back his left fist ready to put his plan into motion. But just before he could, he felt something slap him in the cheek with an audible smack, as he was slightly dazed before he realized right away that he was no longer falling hard and fast, but instead his descent down was already decreasing by the second, though he was still falling rather fast for his liking. Looking down, he saw the black-haired boy from before as he was already there ready to catch him, which he did without falling over despite having lost balance for a few moments before reorienting himself, only giving a light oof as the greenette now found himself safely in his arms. "You okay, bro?" he asked as he carefully placed him back on the ground. "Why, yeah." Izuku nodded as he still felt like he was lighter than air, turning to where the smack came from as he saw Poca, 𝗵𝗲, Ken, and the chocolate brunette as they approached them, the former still looking fine while latter looked fine but her clothes were a little roughed up. "Release," the gravity girl whispered as she placed her hands by the fingertips together. Like clockwork, his feet were back firmly on the ground as her quirk had been cancelled out, making the pain in his toes more present as he gingerly kept his toes elevated, well as much as he could, as his hurt toes were sensitive to the fabric inside the shoes which made them sting, as he was practically sitting on his heels. "Still hanging in there?" Poca asked him, pointing to his injuries in a half-joke but mostly concerned manner. "Why, yeah," Izuku replied with a sheepish smile, softly chuckling before he looked down at his injured right hand, In his mind, it looked like his hand had met the bad end of a meat-tenderizing mallet as he said, "Besides the obvious injuries, I'm still okay." "I knew there would be injuries, and you weren't joking about it, but ouch, this hurts." "I can only imagine," the other brunette commented, her smile not able to hide her own concern at seeing how bad he was hurt, internally shuddering at the mere thought of that ever happening to her own hands, and not just because her quirk was in her hands due to being a 5-point touch activation type quirk. Without a word, Poca came to his side as she used her quirk once more to heal his injuries, watching in somewhat morbid, to some folks by a visual standpoint, fascination at seeing his injuries started to disappear right before his eyes, feeling everything being put back into place and the pain finally going away. And not just in his hand but in his toes too as they were being healed as well. He even felt some of his energy coming back to him. The only evidence of him ever having injuries would be indicated from the right sleeve of his jumpsuit having been shredded from using more of his quirk and some tiny traces of blood that could be seen at the tip of his shoes. Although it was forgivable given that his shoes were already red and the fact that the stains were pretty small and were along the lines of the shoes so nobody would really notice unless they actually crouched down and got a closer look. Other than that, he was the picture of health. Having a healing quirk is so cool. The raven-haired boy commented with a literal sharp smile as 𝗵𝗲 popped onto the brunette's shoulder as he started licking him, glad to see he was okay as the boy chuckled at this, petting him lightly in return. "I know, right? And super handy too." The chocolate brunette agreed, still surprised that she didn't feel nauseous nor even stretched thin. Poca felt flustered as she lightly chuckled at that, rubbing the back of her head with her left hand as she used the right to indicate any other direction and said to Izuku, "We managed to get the others away from here just before you smashed that robot's face in like it were made of paper mache. They're all well and healed." Izuku sighed in relief as he deflated at that. "Glad to hear." The girl too sighed in relief, discreetly trying to keep herself upright as she still felt out of breath from everything. "If this is only from a mere 10 minutes, then how am I going to do on the field when the time comes?" she asked herself incredulously, feeling wary knowing that she was going to need to do some serious training after all this was over. While she had some skills in self-defense, she had good reflexes and flexibility thanks to some bit of gymnast training by herself and in learning how to break dance, and she can run a very long way when it comes to track as she was often told to be an ace at it and even asked if she was interested in that sort of career field. She knew for a fact that she was going to need more under her belt before she can call herself competent enough to be able to survive a mere fight with a real villain. The ones that are more dangerous than the mere street-level punks, that is. After all, she's going to need more than her intelligence, tactical planning, and any other skill she has alone to help her in her endeavors. You'll either need to find a gym or a quiet place where you can do some training and quirk training without getting in trouble. Ken replied, most likely the latter, as the last thing we want is people asking too many questions about your quirk right away. Thankfully, we can simply ask any insects around for any kind of recommendation they can give us for this case." "You got that right, Ken." Poca agreed before looking back at Izuku. His injuries weren't gravely severe like what originally happened the first time, so this should help spare his limbs from further suffering in the long run. "At least I hope so. Sure, the injuries he had were still concerning, but at least they weren't as horrendous as what happened the first time." Internally, she shuddered at the mere thought of being unable to use her own arms ever again. Let alone this happening because of her arms being put under severe stress, strain, and pain beyond reasoning. She may have a big pain tolerance, but it was nowhere near as strong as Izuku's. The gap between them was about as large as Mount Fuji itself. "And that's it. Time's up," President Mike announced as a siren went off, signifying that the physical exam was over as every single participant, including the group, was able to relax, and any robots that may have still been active were automatically deactivated upon reaching the time limit. "Well, that's that," Poca said as she allowed herself to fall on her butt, inhaling deeply before sighing loudly, glad that the exams were over and that she had survived along with the others. "Yup," Ijiro agreed as he started to stretch his limbs to relieve them with the tension after everything. "I just hope we did well enough to pass," Achicho said, still filled with uncertainty. "I sincerely agree with you," Poca half moaned, not wanting to think about it now as her mind felt like it was ready to shut off as the adrenaline started to wear off, her energy feeling drained out. "Guess you're pretty tired, huh?" Izuku asked her. "You got that right," she answered as she had a gentle glow of light pink around herself. "Even if my healing can restore someone's energy, including my own, it doesn't change the fact that I myself can still feel the drain of stamina and fatigue forming in from using it multiple times. 𝗵𝗲 barked in agreement as he then let out a very cute yawn, which made the zero-gravity user squeal at the cuteness of it, as he was then placed back down on the ground by Izuku, who got the unasked memo. As the puppy was too tired to teleport to her normally, upon reaching the ground the puppy simply walked over to his owner, getting onto her lap as he yawned one more time before curling up into a ball of fluff and fell asleep. So cute. 𝐒𝐻𝐿 gushed as she just couldn't take the cuteness overload. I almost feel jealous that you have such a cute and reliable partner with you. Jealousy is an ugly mistress, my dear, and you do well to stay away from it lest it ensnare you in the worst way possible. Poca advised sagely despite her tired state, planning on hitting the sack as soon as she did some brief grocery shopping because yes, she needs to make sure she eats before going to bed, otherwise she'll wake up feeling horrible. You have a very good point. 𝗬𝗎 conceded without a fight. Seeing her point, getting jealous all over anything is only a bundle of trouble waiting to explode. It just won't help anyone. 𝗬𝗎 came from a poor background, so she knew the value of being humble and grateful for what she had. Her parents didn't raise a greedy brat. Nor a jealous one for that matter. You got that right. Ijiro agreed before turning his attention back to the pale brunette and said, You sound pretty wise for someone our age. I get that frequently. Poca admits. Still having that kind of profound wisdom is so madly. He proclaimed before he stopped himself as he realized. Oh, sorry, It's all right. She instantly stopped him with her hand raised, signifying for him to shush it as she, after dismissing the healing glow, recharged enough to stay awake, told him kindly, I get what you mean. It's like calling someone dude. While sure you can call a woman dad, the word dude still implies regardless of gender. You were just saying it's amazing. You meant no harm, so it's okay. The raven-haired boy smiled at this. Thanks, miss. Finally someone who gets it. He cheered, only to stop short as he realized something very important. Oh wait, I don't think I know your name yet, and wait a second there. Come to think of it, I don't think any of us actually introduced ourselves. Wait, you're right. 𝗬𝗎 agreed, just as surprised. Why yeah, Izuku agreed. Then it seems like introductions are in order. Poca announced as she got back up, carefully maneuvering her puppy in her arms as she looked at the group. The tiredness now faded to make room for a kind greeting, smiling as she began. I'll start first. My name is Pocahontas 𝗧𝗏. But please call me Poca, given the fact that my name is too long to say. I'm also from America, so as you can expect, I don't mind you guys calling me that. As you already know, this puppy here is 𝗵𝗲, and the dragonfly currently on my head is Ken. I hope you don't mind if I call you all by your first name since I'm from the States. Not at all. Ijiro told her, not finding any problems there as he understood why. Same with 𝗬𝗎, who nodded in agreement, as did Izuku, smiling as he went next. I'm Ijiro Kirishima. Nice to meet you all. Same here, 𝗬𝗎 said. My name is 𝗬𝗎 Uraraka. Izuku stuttered for a bit, still getting used to actually introducing himself to others his age without the fear of being attacked or treated badly straight away, before he soon introduced himself. And I'm Izuku Midoriya. Sorry if I sound so nervous. Not at all, man. I'm sometimes kind of shy introducing myself to a new person too, so I know how you feel. The hardening user reassured, which surprised the greenette. Me too. 𝗬𝗎 agreed, surprising the boy more. It's often like that. Meeting new people can be scary at the start sometimes, but once you get to know them, then it won't be so scary later on. Poca chimed, sending him a kind smile of reassurance. She's got a point there. Ijiro agreed, flashing him a friendly grin. Having friends makes the journey ahead seem less scary, 'cause being alone stinks. True that. 𝗬𝗎 nodded vigorously, giving the greenette a warm smile. Plus, it will make things a little easier once we transition into high school, and whether we all get accepted or not, having friends with you will still help you in the long run. After all, nobody likes to be lonely. And once more Poca's wise words surprised him with yet another valid point, and even had others agreeing with her too. It seemed like the more he spent time with her, despite how little they've known each other within that same day, the more he started to feel like this is what it was like to have a real understanding and caring friend. Which, even he had to admit, was a far cry from Kaken didn't like receiving advice as if he were being told what to do like an underling. His temper was very bad, which was very easy to set off, and he was about as friendly as a prickly cactus. The two of them were complete opposites of the other. Even just thinking of the comparison between them surprised 𝗏𝗏𝗏. And now, thanks to her, he had two more real friends to talk to, and hopefully count on. The more the day went on, the more he felt like he was either going to get overwhelmed or feel like he was going to land in the pile of more questions he wouldn't find answers to straight away. He felt like the world was being turned on its head at the very prospect of actually meeting kind and friendly people who didn't have any beef with him for whatever reason. Sure, they didn't know he used to be quirkless, except for Poca, who had already figured that out with her quirk before they went to the orientation hall, but still. He guessed this was just something he was going to have to get used to, especially as hopefully this new school year would promise the chance to finally meet lifelong friends he never got to have growing up and have an actual good school year, this time with a chance to make good lifelong lasting memories. Still, he didn't think he would be meeting friends even before the school year even started, let alone on the day of the entrance exam itself. Truer words were never said, chimed an elderly voice as all of them turned to the source of it. It was from a short, extremely so, elderly woman with gray hair styled into a netted bun, a large syringe poking diagonally out of it to the left. Small nose and eyes, and a long mouth with defined nasolabial folds. Wearing a doctor's lab coat and a pink dress with a yellow and red vest-like design on either side, 2 yellow buttons, and a belt with a pink R-shaped buckle, pink boots, and a helmet around the sides of her head, a purple-tinted visor joining it over her eyes. In addition, she had a big cane that looked a lot like a syringe. Immediately, Izuku recognized her and exclaimed in excitement, "The youthful heroine, recovery girl. So cool. I'm one of your biggest fans. If only I had my notebook with me so I can ask you for an autograph. Maybe later, but for now keep your priorities straight, dearie." She politely chided as she then asked the group, "Are all of you okay? Do any of you have any injuries?" "We're all okay," 𝐒𝐻𝐿 replied. "Especially thanks to Poca here." Poca blushed at that, rubbing the back of her head sheepishly, almost feeling like she was being placed on the spot, even though she knew that the girl meant no harm. "Yeah, her quirk is totally awesome and very helpful." Ichiro cheered, Izuku agreeing as he nodded. "Yes, I saw that on the monitors," the elderly lady said as she got closer, walking in front of the pale brunette, and she looked up at the girl. "You really caught my attention, dearie. It's not every day I meet someone as young as yourself with a healing quirk wanting to be a hero, let alone someone who has a quirk that can do more than just heal." Poca nervously laughed. Anime sweat dropped as she replied, "I can only imagine." "Yep, I knew that was going to happen. There's no way the old woman's going to ignore a child who has a powerful healing quirk, especially as she herself isn't getting any younger anytime soon." Poca thought, without a doubt knowing that she was going to take the girl under her wing and train her as an apprentice, and no one was going to say otherwise given the look in her eyes. "No one says I can't be both an underground hero and a nurse, as I actually do have skills on first aid which has served me well more than once in the past." She thoughtfully thought, which was true. If the voice hero can be both a pro hero and a talk show host on the radio, and if Hound Dog can be both a hero as well as a teacher and school counselor, if 𝗬𝗵𝗲 can be a rescue hero as well as a model, if Gunhead can be both a brawler hero and the owner of a dojo, like, really, if the pro heroes here at UA can also be teachers, then why can't she have another profession on the side too? There's nothing against the rules about heroes having side jobs after all. Sure, she had enough on her plate as it was, but given some specific details of her own mission, she was more than willing to compromise, as this would be a fruitful endeavor that would serve her well in the long run. "Even some of the worst injuries I saw you were able to heal as if it wasn't a problem. You're even capable of healing yourself too," the older woman said in her analysis, "and by the looks of it you were even able to revitalize the energy of the people you healed." "Yeah, though there is a true difference between energy and stamina, as they are two completely different things, which people half of the time forget," said the younger girl as the puppy in her arms yawned cutely once more, not waking up as he curled more into the arm his owner was holding him in. "So adorable." The zero-gravity user squealed in her head as she tried desperately to bite back her verbal response, not wanting to scare the puppy while it was asleep and not wanting to interrupt the conversation unfolding before her, also fighting tooth and nail to not inadvertently activate her own quirk on herself. "Indeed, you are correct." Recovery girl nodded, then deducedly said, "You have years of experience in first aid, do you?" Poca nodded confidently, "Yup, it comes with the territory." Smiling kindly, intrigued as she then asks her, "I know you must already be a bit exhausted, but if you do not mind, I would like to see you use your healing in action. There are a number of participants here who got hurt in this test, and it would help to have an extra hand on this." Even if she wanted to politely decline, she tossed any lingering exhaustion out the window, knowing that there were others that might need some help. She was willing to compromise for the sake of ensuring that everybody could go home without too many issues. Besides, this wasn't her first rodeo in this regard. I mean, sure, this time around she literally had the power to heal, but she was quite used to exerting herself more to help others despite her own fatiguing stamina. Besides, when she thinks about it, it will help her to have an experienced professional by her side to help her gauge how vast her healing can extend, gauging how far she can go before she can reach other limits to it. Who is she to say no to a helpful opportunity like this? Plus, it would make her feel better knowing that everybody else could get home sooner without any more delays. She didn't feel right turning her down otherwise. Sure. She accepted without hesitation. Maybe we can come along too. There might be a chance that there might be other people that are trapped under some bits of debris and such. Thanks to Poca here, we have extra energy to spare. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 was the first offer, not wanting to be left out and offer her assistance too. She felt the same way as the pale brunette. Plus, it would give me an opportunity to observe that part of her quirk in action, since I offered to help her with a few other details on possibilities and limits to her quirk that she herself may need help on. Izuku chimed next, a bit surprised with himself, but still he didn't want to be left out at being able to help others who might be having it rough right now and squander an opportunity to start right away on seeing the details of that side of his friend's quirk, and that of the others too, as he'll get a chance to see them in action outside of battling, if they don't mind, that is. Count me in. I couldn't call myself a man if I left others to fend for themselves, knowing that I had the quirk and energy to provide assistance to them too. 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐳 volunteered without a second thought. Recovery Girl smiled more at this. Happy the girl agreed, and happy that her friends agreed to help too, which will make her job easier. Plus, by doing this, all four of them will earn extra rescue points, which will help their chances in getting accepted, not to say that the points they already earned weren't more than enough. She had a feeling this upcoming school year was going to be a good one as she nodded as she thanked them all, giving them a handful of gummies as she told them to help themselves so they can gain back some more of their strength before the group began to make their way around the exam site. Ken, still enough energy to spare, and only half tired, offered his assistance in locating anyone that might have been hidden that needed help, which Poca agreed as she relayed that to the others, which they agreed to. The day was still young, so it was time to get started. I've never been more exhausted in my whole entire life. Poca moaned tiredly as she forced herself to keep walking, despite her feeling exhausted beyond belief. Way more than any other time she could ever recall. I feel like a gang of mosquitoes sucked out not only my blood but all of my other resources too. The group were all currently making their way out of the school, as the skies were starting to turn orange. The rest of the day as a whole consisted of them going around the test site with youthful heroine, finding anyone else who might have gotten injured at the very end, or might be trapped and needed some help, which indeed there were plenty of, as well as those who needed some comfort in one way or another. All the while, Izuku recorded all of his findings in a fresh blank mini notebook that the elderly women provided him along with a pencil, not only recording her quirk, but that of the others as he asked questions here and there about the limitations from each one of them. Even recording a few more notes on the Pomeranian, who was still snoozing around then, but was wide awake at this present time, as the pup had awakened some 25-ish participants before they were finished and lent a paw to them once more. At the beginning, he was apprehensive to ask as he didn't want to seem intrusive or creepy, but thanks to the encouragement he received from the others, he was able to ask a little more freely and give them some insights and tips that may help them in the future, feeling relieved as all of them told him that his analysis was anything but creepy. The same went for Recovery Girl herself, who told him that that kind of analysis would serve him greatly in the future, as such a skill like that was extremely valuable and should not be squandered, and even gave him some insights that were very helpful. Time just flew by for them all. Due to Poca herself already being quite exhausted at the end, the elderly hero offered to give her and the others one final medical exam to spare her any more strain and make sure they were all right to make the journey home, which they accepted. Especially as the pale brunette herself was way too exhausted to argue, more so especially as she fell asleep as soon as she sat on the bed and took a power nap for a good half an hour. Just enough so that she can make the trip home, which thankfully was close by, before the woman sent them all on their merry way. The older heroine allowed Izuku to keep the little notebook that she gave him, provided that he allowed her to make a copy of his notes for herself for medical purposes and to keep an update on the quirk part of their profiles, and of course ask the boy himself about his own overall health and state of his quirk so that she could record it for his file, which he accepted. Only proving that there's a difference between energy and stamina. Even if they can sometimes be the same thing, at times they are, at the end of the day, two completely different subjects altogether. 𝐒𝐻𝐢 agreed, feeling pretty worn out himself but still had enough energy, somehow, to keep walking and stay by the girl's side in case either of them needed a hand, given that the two of them looked like they were sleepwalking and about to collapse. The same went for Izuku, as he was by the pale brunette's side while the hardening user was right by that of the chocolate brunette. Yeah, Izuku nodded and soon asked the two in concern, "Are you sure you two will be okay?" "Thank you for the concern. Don't worry, we'll be okay after a nice long night's sleep." Poca reassured him as 𝗬𝗧𝗔𝗄 nodded in agreement with a tired, "Yeah." "I didn't even bother to count how many people I used my quirks on, but I'm pretty sure, at least roughly, that I have assisted and healed at least over 100 teenagers," the ice-skate girl thought as she fought hard against the growing hunger in her stomach. But after a brief moment of silence, Poca opened her tired eyes. "You know what?" Soon she straightened her posture. 𝗵𝗲 once more perched at his usual spot on her shoulders as he, alone with the others, gave her their undivided attention, along with Ken, who was once again on top of her head, walking proudly as she, now more wide awake with this new resolve, then told them with a smile that beamed with a sense of accomplishment, "I don't regret all that I did today. I may be tired, but who cares? I'm going to need a nap, but that's okay. It was all worth it in the end if I was able to help others more than just during the actual test itself. Knowing that I helped make things easier for everyone, even in the smallest of ways, is something to be happy about, right?" This made them all perk up, especially 𝗬𝗧𝗄, as this got her to wake up, as they stared at her in awe, once more inspired as they all smiled back at her. All the exhaustion they were feeling soon faded from them too, like her, in the process. "That's so manly," 𝐒𝐻𝐢 exclaimed as he felt tears rolling up in his eyes. "I agree with you tenfold." "Absolutely," 𝗬𝗧𝗄 cheered, pumping her fist, "'cause that's what it means to be a hero." "Yeah," Izuku agreed, feeling a wave of confidence overtake him as he proclaimed, "We all gave it our best. Going plus ultra both in the exam and afterwards. No matter how tired we all are at the end of the day, no pun intended, we all achieved something great, and all the energy, stamina, effort, and time we put into it all helped us to grow as future heroes, so it was more than worth it." "Yeah." The others cheered at this while the Pomeranian howled and Ken made a loud buzzing noise with his wings, both cheering in their own way. Suddenly the gang heard someone clapping loudly as they all turned to the source, which turned out to be, to their surprise, the blue-haired engine boy from before, as his hands were raised high, clapping very loudly, moved to tears as he then shouted, "So beautiful. How noble to think like that." They all felt embarrassed when he said bravo several times, feeling like this was a bit over the top, especially for Izuku and Poca, who both blushed even worse than the others were. Talk about embarrassing, in a flattering way. The two thought the same thing. What followed after was the gang introducing themselves to the boy, who with his arm gestures made it seem like he was a robot, as they all got to talking, getting to know each other a little more, and talked about the test. Okay, so their gang of 6, if you include the puppy and dragonfly, now became a gang of 7 thanks to Tenya Ida. Talk about a way to end the day. To say that he was exhausted beyond recollection would have been accurate. He was relieved that he had the day off today, cause otherwise he probably would have collapsed ages ago. Well, sort of technically, his first job being a doctor to all and being a doctor to his master and personal friend, it meant he had the day off for the former. Still, nothing could have prepared him for what happened after the big major operation he had given to the man, nor could he have ever expected what would happen after everything was said and done. He was just relieved that he was able to calm him down and get him to fall asleep, although his sudden ruckus will set him back for some time. More in terms of him getting proper rest after such a lengthy, crucial, and critically important operation. Due to the nature of the operation itself, he set back his recovery time to a solid week and a half, give or take, judging by the analysis he got after getting the man to rest easy, after struggling for the better part of an hour to get him to simmer down, almost tempting to get the tranquilizers to get him to fall asleep, even if that would hinder things. Those events still played vividly in his head as he sat down with a nice cup of tea to help him relax. Barely a minute after he was finished did the master wake up without warning, screaming in complete and utter horror. which had legitimately scared him as he has absolutely never reacted in such a volatile manner in all the time he had known him. What he had told him utterly shocked him, baffled him beyond comprehension, and most importantly left him very rattled, as something like this has never occurred in any operation he has ever given him, and I mean never. It took everything in him to keep himself calm so that he could calm down the man before he ended up pulling something, hurt himself badly, or cause something even worse to happen that would set back his recovery time even more than what was already present. It was only after he finally got settled down after getting him to sleep did the doctor take the time to ponder what he had been told. It just doesn't make sense at all. He thought to himself, concerned for the first time in ages. In every operation I've done, nothing like this has ever occurred. Not even once. I'm always careful and pay attention to every single detail that I apply and work on in all of them, no matter what. So what was different this time? Could this somehow have been because of a quirk? Or am I finally experiencing Alzheimer's? No matter how hard he tries, he couldn't think of an answer to this predicament, as something like this didn't happen before, and most certainly not in this manner. The more he tried and failed to find an answer to any of it, the more concern and frustration built up, especially at himself for not being able to think of even one decent enough answer for that, let alone for allowing such a thing to happen in the first place. And just thinking about it made his already growing headache get worse. And with his dear friend's outburst, it will set back a few things for a long while, might even cause some issues to arise later. At least the only positive is that some of the less lengthy procedures he needs to do for the man won't be as long nor be as tiresome. Speaking of which, the doctor soon let out a long and loud yawn as sleep had caught up with him. He really should have expected this, considering that he had been operating all day since the crack of dawn, given the importance that operation had been. And given that it was still his day off and there was nothing else important, financial or otherwise, that needed to be done, he might as well hit the sack early, as the kids would say. At least he didn't have to worry about eating throughout that day, given that the quirk he had allowed him to operate without having even one meal for a total of a whole day without suffering any form of fatigue, hunger, drowsiness, or exhaustion. The drawback for it, though, was that the very next day he would suffer all of that at once, especially hunger. It doesn't change the fact that he does still need to eat now and then, as he himself can't afford to be lackluster and endanger his own health. For sake of work, still it was a very handy quirk for such a situation as this. Plus it may do him some good so his mind could be sharper, calmer, and focused so he can try and figure out this latest conundrum. And he will, once he informed their right hand, so the young master, more like an immature brat who he was still apprehensive of, but not for the reasons many may think, wouldn't ask questions or become concerned. The last thing he wanted was noisy company, whether through video, phone, or otherwise.